Chapter 1624. Go down. At this moment, Wang Yu, who was at the other end of the staff, shouted. He grabbed the staff with both hands and swung it to the side. The warlock was involuntarily swung down. Not only the warlock, but the other players on the stairs were also affected. After all, Wang Yu was standing on the 6th floor. To move, unhindered players were standing on the 7th floor. The players around Wang Yu were all range players. Priests, warlocks, and archers, none of them could take a beating. What kind of strength did Wang Yu have? How could this bunch of weaklings withstand it? Wang Yu used the staff as an AoE weapon. To move, unhindered players on the stairs were like dumplings falling into a pot. They were swung down by Wang Yu. The height of the 6th floor was even higher than the city walls. Even the thick-skinned holy knights could fall to their deaths, let alone the backline professions. Most of them would die on the spot. Even if they were lucky enough to survive the fall, they wouldn't have a good time either. After all, there was Old Man Wang keeping watch downstairs. These players from Unhindered had a strong desire to survive. They attacked Old Wang the moment they landed on the ground. Old Wang raised his sword and slashed it down. Luo, 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 luo. White light rose into the air, and it was a beautiful sight to behold from above. With Wang Yu around, the warlock to move, unhindered players were completely useless. Without the warlock's strong crowd control, who could stop evildoers run wild? To move, unhindered players against evildoers run wild were a little afraid. Now that evildoers run wild was no longer intimidating, they were even more shocked. Everyone, let's go. The group looked at each other. There was a wolf in front of them, a tiger behind them, and a crocodile below them. What was despair? They knew that they would die if they fought, and they would die if they didn't. In desperation, the group raised their shields and pounced on evildoers run wild. Good timing. Evildoers run wild had been suppressed and beaten up all the way, so he had a belly full of anger. At this moment, he had no scruples. Seeing that his opponents were swarming towards him, he simply stomped his feet and stood firmly. With a loud shout, he pushed both of his palms forward, and his palms hit the shields of his opponents. Evildoers Run Wild did not lack money, equipment, techniques, or strength. With this push, the two shield-wielding players in front of them lost their balance and fell heavily to the ground. Evildoers Run Wild strength was already quite high, and with the addition of two shield warriors, one could just imagine how powerful they would be. Boom! The two shield warriors smashed into the players behind them, causing them to lose their balance. As more and more people joined the fight, the momentum of the fight grew stronger and stronger. Rumble with a series of sounds. A group of players in the front row rolled down the stairs like a rolling snowball, breaking through the handrail and falling downstairs. Old Wang, who was downstairs, raised his blade and followed after them, leaving no one alive. Wang Yu, with his staff in hand, controlled the entire situation, beating the backline players until they couldn't even let out a fart. Evildoers Run Wild was in charge of charging forward, knocking the opponents into a complete mess. Old Wang, on the other hand, squatted downstairs with his blade in hand, chopping down every enemy that came his way. The three of them worked together seamlessly. The players that Sovereign Descends brought to surround Evildoers Run Wild were all his subordinates. To move unhindered experts, Sovereign Descends couldn't command them. Therefore, even though City of Sin had a lot of people, there weren't many experts who could take charge of an area by themselves. For example, the players in the tower might be considered elites among Sovereign Descent subordinates, but that was all they could do. They couldn't even take care of a single Evildoers Run Wild with so many people, let alone Evildoers Run Wild with two more helpers who were even stronger than him. To move, unhindered players in the tower were beaten up by Wang Yu, Old Wang, and Old Wang until they had nowhere to run. White light flashed inside the tower, and screams of pain rang out. Even through the door, the players outside could hear what was going on inside. When everyone heard this, they all kept quiet out of fear, not daring to take even half a step forward. It was at this moment that Sovereign Descends, who had revived, ran back. When he saw his subordinates standing outside the door and watching the show from afar, he immediately became furious and shouted, "What are you guys standing there for? Hold your ground. As long as they come out, don't leave a single one alive." When everyone heard Sovereign Descent's words, they all wore disdainful expressions. Damn it. You've already been killed, and you still say that you won't leave anyone alive? How can you be so thick-skinned? To move, unhindered players were all minors, and none of them were complete idiots. They all had their own plans in mind. Right now, everyone could tell that the three people inside the tower were all terrifyingly strong. The weakest among them, evildoers run wild, was already enough to give them a hard time. Now, there was also the so-called number one expert, Wang Yu, and an unfathomable beastman uncle. What was even worse was that these three people had a bunch of immoral helpers, and the wave of attacks just now had brought disaster to many of our guild members. Who would dare to challenge them now? If they did, they would die. Lives in the game were worthless, but if they knew that they would die, wouldn't they be idiots? They were all smart people. They could die, but they couldn't be idiots. Damn it! Seeing that none of his subordinates dared to surround them, Sovereign Descends felt awkward. It wasn't as if Sovereign Descends the world had never thought of such a situation. After all, compared to himself, most of the players in Unhindered were the type of people who were content with a little bit of wealth. The evildoer Rampage was supporting them with a monthly salary of tens of thousands of RMB. Who would want to rebel? Now that they were in such a situation, it was normal for them to retreat. Of course, the fact that Sovereign Descends could trick everyone into rebelling with him showed that he was also an expert at brainwashing. Seeing that everyone had the intention to retreat, Sovereign Descends pondered for a moment and shouted, "Do you think you'll be fine if you don't charge forward? We've already made our move, and there's no turning back. If we don't kill evildoers run wild and get your contracts, none of us will be able to escape." Hearing Sovereign Descends' words, everyone's heart trembled. To move unhindered, wasn't it for the sake of a stable job and to surround evildoers run wild? It was also for the sake of advancing further. But once they boarded the pirate ship, they couldn't get off. Everyone was labeled as a rebel. Evildoers run wild had always been a decisive killer. Naturally, he wouldn't spare them just because they didn't attack him. Now, they had no choice but to cut off their means of retreat. Seeing that his subordinates' expressions had changed, Sovereign Descends continued. "Now that the three in the tower are blacklisted, as long as you guys can kill them, their equipment will belong to everyone. I don't want a single one of them. Also, if you can kill them, you'll be my right-hand man from now on." Chapter 16:25. It had to be said that even though Sovereign Descend's character wasn't all that great, he was still very good at conning people. This set of coaxing and scaring words quickly stabilized the morale of the army and gathered the scattered subordinates back together. There would always be brave men with great rewards. None of them could escape in the first place. Now that there was such a temptation, how could they not give it a try? Even if it wasn't for survival, even if it was for equipment, there was no reason for them to escape. Under Sovereign Descent's encouragement, the players once again spread out into formation. The tanks were at the front, the damage dealers were at the back, and the control players were at the flanks. Layers upon layers of players surrounded the mage tower like an iron bucket. The players outside the formation were ready on the streets. Even if Wang Yu and the others were lucky enough to escape the encirclement, they would only fall back into another encirclement. Sovereign Descent stood on a high vantage point and looked at the players on the streets, shoulder to shoulder. He then glanced at the mage tower that was tightly surrounded. The gloominess he felt when he was thrown off the building by Wang Yu was swept away and replaced with lofty sentiments. Of course, Sovereign Descent couldn't be blamed for not learning from his mistakes. Not to mention ambitious players like Monarch Descends. Even a happy-go-lucky player with no fighting spirit would feel their head swell with pride at the thought of being able to command tens of thousands of players with a wave of his hand. After all, authority was something that stimulated people's brains. Even a QQ group owner with a small amount of authority would speak in an unyielding manner. Right now, a single word from Sovereign Descent could make tens of thousands of fully armed players throw their lives away for him. It was easy to imagine how excited he was. It was like a certain religion with a Samsung phone. Wherever he pointed, it would explode. Damn it. No matter how strong you are, can you break through tens of thousands of people? To move unhindered in the mage tower, there were only 100 or so players. If it were any other player, they would definitely waste a lot of time and effort to deal with so many enemies. However, in front of monsters like Wang Yu and the others, 100 or so players really wasn't much. Just as sovereign descent was tempting the players, the three of them effortlessly sent all the players out of the tower. Dad, boss, if you guys had come any later, I would have been dead. Even though Evildoers Run Wild was a boss and had millions of players under his command, in front of Wang Yu and Lao Wang, Evildoers Run Wild was still a child. After clearing out all his opponents, Evildoers Run Wild's tense heartstrings finally relaxed. For a moment, he felt wronged, depressed, afraid. All sorts of emotions welled up in his heart. Looking at his father and brother who had come to save him, Evildoers Run Wild almost cried on the spot. Wang Yu and Lao Wang were both smart people. To move unhindered, they could more or less guess the reason for the internal strife. At that moment, when they saw Evildoers Run Wild's appearance, the two of them felt somewhat guilty and were not in the mood to laugh at Evildoers Run Wild. After all, this was the most uncomfortable moment for Evildoers Run Wild. He had worked so hard to run the guild and provide employment for so many of his subordinates, but in the end, his subordinates betrayed him. Even if Evildoers Run Wild and his subordinates had a mutually beneficial relationship, this sudden incident still made Evildoers Run Wild feel as if he had met an ungrateful person. Anyone who had experienced betrayal would know. All right. It's not a big deal. It's all in the past. Lao Wang hugged Evildoers Run Wild's shoulder and hugged him. He patted Evildoers Run Wild's shoulder and said, "Isn't it just internal strife? If they don't want to play with you, I'll play with you." "You're not playing with me," Evildoers Run Wild said unhappily. "This is my career." All right, career. Lao Wang said helplessly. "In any case, your brother will definitely have a way. F***CK. What can I do?" Hearing Lao Wang's words, Wang Yu was depressed. Old men love young children. Such a simple sentence, but when Lao Wang said it, it made people feel so good. Although Wang Yu knew that he had his own reasons for this. To move unhindered wasn't a small guild with tens of thousands of people. If it was like the Blood Alliance with tens of thousands of people in one city, then it would be fine. With Wang Yu and Xuanzhen's abilities, even if they couldn't kill the other party, they would be able to peel off a layer of skin. To move unhindered, what kind of guild was that? It spanned over 300 cities in the game and had millions of players. If such a huge mess messed up, where would Wang Yu go to clean it up? To make his younger son happy, Lao Wang spoke irresponsibly. Wasn't his eldest son still his son? Ha! Lao Wang saw that Wang Yu was anxious and laughed out loud. "I was just casually saying it. Don't mind the details." When Wang Yu and Evildoers Run Wild heard this, they were speechless. This old man really treated them like kids and played with them. Then what should we do now? After thinking for a moment, Evildoers Run Wild looked at Wang Yu and Xuanzhen and asked. The enemies in the tower had been wiped clean, but the evildoers had only been spared. Everyone knew what was going on. Unhindered was such a huge organization, and it was not unknown how many evildoers were lurking in the shadows. Now that something like this had happened, there were bound to be others watching. Since things had come to this, naturally this matter would not end just like that. To move unhindered right now was the same as the Three Fiends Manor in the past. Every guild had their own forces, and although they hadn't fully matured yet, they could at least see the outline. The boss, Rampant Demon, also had subordinates under him. However, it was only a small portion of his forces. The other players who were in control of their respective guilds were quietly observing the situation and waiting to pick a side. They wouldn't side with Monarch Descends or Rampant Demon. Therefore, the first shot had to be fired. Winning or losing wasn't important. Choosing a side was the most important. Of course, they would help whoever was stronger. If Evildoers Run Wild could survive this battle, then the other guilds would once again be intimidated by Evildoers Run Wild. When that time came, they would naturally side with Evildoers Run Wild. If Evildoers Run Wild lost his guild leader's token or contract, then Monarch Descend would obviously have the upper hand. Naturally, everyone would side with Monarch Descends. Otherwise, Monarch Descends wouldn't have set up such a huge trap, isolating the monster rampage in such a godforsaken place, all for the sake of easily winning the first round. What else can we do? Old Wang and Wang Yu had never experienced something like this before, so they were a little confused by Evildoers Run Wild's question. Wang Yu scratched the back of his head and said, "I don't think this is a good place to be. We should find a safe place first and come up with a plan." Wang Yu had seen the players outside when they entered. There was a sea of players waiting outside, and who knew when they would charge in. It wasn't a good idea to stay here. If he wanted to come up with a plan, he would have to ask Wuji for advice. All right, then let's get out of here first. Chapter 16:26. Not good. However, the instant Evildoers Run Wild opened the door, Wang Yu and Old Wang simultaneously froze. They felt an overwhelming, killing, intent rush into the tower. At the same time, Sovereign Descent saw Evildoers Run Wild open the door and immediately ordered, "Attack!" Whoosh, 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 boom, boom, boom. In the blink of an eye, spells and arrows rained down on Rampage's head like a torrential downpour. If it was Wang Yu, he would definitely be able to dodge these attacks easily. However, Evildoers Run Wild was a grandmaster of combat who focused all of his stat points on strength. His equipment leaned towards strength, and his agility was relatively weak. Although Evildoers Run Wild reacted quickly and knew to use his legs to dodge, his agility was limited. Evildoers Run Wild could not die. There were so many people outside the door, and Evildoers Run Wild's name was already so red that it was almost black. If he dared to die, the system would make sure that even his underwear would be revealed. Seeing that Evildoers Run Wild was about to be bombarded to death, Wang Yu immediately jumped back and slapped his hand forward. A white light wrapped around Evildoers Run Wild's waist and pulled Evildoers Run Wild behind him. Then he raised a shield in front of him. Rumble, 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 rumble. At the same time, countless arrows and spells rained down on the place where Evildoers Run Wild had just stood. If not for the sturdiness of the magic tower, this wave of attacks would have leveled it to the ground. Even so, the entire magic tower was shaken and filled with smoke. Some of the attacks even made it through the door and into the magic tower. Fortunately, Wang Yu raised his shield and barely withstood this wave of attacks. There was strength in numbers. Sure enough, it wasn't just a saying. A wave of nearly 10,000 people attacking at the same time was actually this powerful. Kill. As Confucius said, there is smoke, there is no harm. Without waiting for the smoke to disperse, the frontline classes of Unhindered let out a roar, raised their shields, and charged into the tower. Unfortunately, the entrance to the mage tower wasn't very wide. Shield warriors, who were in the front row, could only fit 2 people at a time. Lao Wang stood at the door. Although the smoke had not dispersed, he could clearly sense that someone had rushed to the door. Thus, he opened his hands, grabbed the 2 doors, and suddenly closed them. Bang! The shield warriors slammed into the tower's doors, shattering them into pieces and sending them flying into the tower. Lao Wang was ready for battle. When he saw that the wooden door had been knocked open, Lao Wang took a step forward. Closely after, he leaped up and pressed his hand against the ground. His feet suddenly stepped on the edge of their shields. Dong dong. With 2 soul-shaking muffled sounds, the 2 shield bearers suddenly felt an overwhelming force coming from their shields. Lao Wang didn't kick the middle of the shields. Instead, he kicked the inner edges of the 2 shields. With this kick, the 2 shield bearers turned 180 degrees uncontrollably, leaving their backs to Lao Wang. Lao Wang stood up and didn't stop. He drew his sword with his right hand and suddenly turned his waist. Then he slashed at the back of their necks with his black sword. Pft. Lao Wang's night demon blade accurately chopped at the necks of the 2, and their heads were sent flying. As he had attacked too quickly, the corpses of the 2 shield bearers stopped for almost 2 minutes before turning into white light. Instantly, the entire arena fell silent. This was especially so for Sovereign Descends and the others who had been slashed by Lao Wang. They subconsciously took 2 steps back. Others didn't know how powerful Lao Wang was, but Sovereign Descends and the others who had been killed by Lao Wang were very clear about it. Shield warriors had the highest HP and defense among all the professions. Even pure damage output professions didn't dare to say that they could kill a shield warrior in one move. However, not only had Lao Wang done it, he had done it so cleanly. What was even more terrifying was that this old man had instantly killed a shield warrior. There had never been anyone who could last more than 2 slashes from him. Damn, evildoers run wild, and Wang, you were already so terrifying, but this orc was even more terrifying than them. One evildoers run wild was already a 1 in a million peerless expert. Now, 3 of them had suddenly appeared. From what evildoers run wild had said, Wang Yu was his elder brother, and the orc was his father. Even a family of 3 was so fierce. What kind of people had he provoked? Would there be a group of uncles? When he thought of this, Sovereign Descends suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. When people were afraid, it was easier for them to lose their rationality. Seeing how powerful Lao Wang was, Sovereign Descends became hot-headed and shouted, "What are you all looking at? Keep going." Hearing Sovereign Descends roar, the players trembled and immediately recovered from their shock. They raised their weapons and rushed forward. Hee. Lao Wang and Wang Yu looked at each other and stood on the left and right sides of the door. Facing the players rushing in, Wang Yu extended her long staff towards the door and immediately tripped the target, causing him to lose his balance. Lao Wang followed from the other side and chopped off the heads of the players on the ground as if he was chopping vegetables. A professional killer's methods were brilliant, ruthless, and precise. The laymen outside the door were dumbfounded and flabbergasted by what they saw. In the beginning, everyone still thought that they were lucky and rushed forward without any regard for their lives. However, after a few waves, they finally understood what kind of monster their opponent was and didn't dare to take another step forward. Sovereign Descends was so angry that he shouted at the top of his lungs, "Charge, charge! Don't be afraid, don't be afraid, tisk." Hearing Sovereign Descends' words, everyone curled their lips. "Go to hell. You're not the one who's going to die." Seeing that the enemies outside the door were terrified, Lao Wang said proudly, "A bunch of idiots. They don't even look at the geography before rushing forward." Geography. Hearing that, Wang Yu seemed to have thought of something. He looked at the broken door and the mage tower that was full of traces of magic. He couldn't help but frown. "What's wrong?" Seeing this, evildoers run wild asked in confusion, "Is there something wrong?" "Yes." Wang Yu nodded. "This tower is a building that can be destroyed." It was true that Wang Yu was a noob in the game, but he had traveled extensively in the game and could be considered a knowledgeable person. Not long ago, Wang Yu had destroyed a tower that was much grander than the Mage Tower. At the same time, Sovereign Descends was also tired of shouting and cursed angrily. "Damn it, how can a bunch of overcautious people like them do anything big with me?" At this time, a girl named Black Sky White Knight beside Sovereign Descends looked at the Mage Tower and pondered for a moment before saying, "Boss, I'm afraid it's not a good idea to charge forward like this." "Oh, then what should we do?" Sovereign Descends said gloomily. "If they hide inside and refuse to come out, we can't just stand there and wait, can we?" Tens of thousands of people against 3 people. It was obvious who would be at a disadvantage. Moreover, Sovereign Descend's subordinates were all professional players. No. Chapter 16:27. As expected, there were no fools in this world. Those who treated others as fools were the ones who were fools. To move unhindered meant that there was a way to do this. To move unhindered, players could sense what Wang Yu was able to sense. After the previous wave of bombardment, although the target wasn't the magic tower, the area affected by the players' attacks was riddled with scars. It was obvious that this magic tower could be destroyed. Since the target was hiding in the magic tower, they might as well destroy the magic tower. If a normal person heard this, they would definitely think that he was boasting. However, it was an easy feat for Sovereign Descent. Tens of thousands of players. If they attacked together, even a boss could be wiped out in one wave. Sovereign Descent looked in the direction Black Sky and White Knight was pointing. He immediately nodded and said, "All right, let's do it." Then, Sovereign Descent ordered, "Everyone, don't charge. Attack the magic tower." Everyone was dumbfounded when they heard Sovereign Descent's order. Although they didn't understand why Sovereign Descent wanted to go against the magic tower, since the boss had given the order, they would follow through. Thus, under Sovereign Descent's command, all players aimed their weapons at the magic tower. Open fire. Following Sovereign Descent's command, magic arrows filled the sky and rained down on the magic tower. Boom! The magic tower was reduced to rubble after the first wave of attacks. It was on the verge of collapse. The inside of the magic tower shook, as if there was an earthquake. Dust fell from the top of the magic tower, and even the stairs began to crack. Fortunately, both Wang Yu and Old Wang were experts in martial arts. They were able to stand firm in this situation without losing their balance. Evildoers Run Wild's martial arts were relatively weaker. After Sovereign Descent's attack, Evildoers Run Wild was in the most difficult position. He only managed to stabilize himself after leaning against the wall. Damn, what I was afraid of really happened. After stabilizing himself, Evildoers Run Wild wiped the sweat off his forehead. He couldn't help but exclaim, "Boss, let's find a chance to charge out. I don't think this magic tower can last much longer." Charge out. Lao Wang slapped the back of Evildoers Run Wild's head angrily. "Are you stupid? Do you think that we can survive if we rush out? Wasn't that right?" The reason why Monarch Descends had attacked the magic tower was because Wang Yu and the others weren't willing to go out. Right now, over 10,000 players were staring at the entrance of the magic tower. If they went out, they would definitely be targeted. Wang Yu and Lao Wang were still all right. Wang Yu was agile and had Qin Gong, so he could run if he wanted to. Although Lao Wang had also added his strength stat points, his agility was not as good as Wang Yu's. However, the only valuable item on this old man's body was that broken blade. If he died, then so be it. However, not only did Evildoers Run Wild have a full set of top-tier equipment, but he also carried everyone's contracts in his bag. To move unhindered, he even had the guild leader's token in his hand. Contract could be traded, but the guild leader's token could only be dropped. If Evildoers Run Wild died, everything would be over. "Why don't I transfer the guild to you?" As he spoke, Evildoers Run Wild was about to give the guild to Wang Yu. After all, Wang Yu was the only one who could escape. "It's useless." Wang Yu waved his hand. "I have a guild now." Wang Yu was a member of a guild. If he accepted Evildoers Run Wild's gift, he would have to leave Chuanjin. Even if he knew that it was just a formality, he would still have to wait 24 hours after leaving the guild before he could join a new one. This magic tower was already in such a state after just one wave of attacks. How could he wait 24 hours? Dream on. Then what do we do? Seeing that Wang Yu wasn't willing to accept the gift, Evildoers Run Wild grew anxious. Damn it. I can't let this guild fall into the hands of Monarch Descends, can I? If that happens, I'd rather disband Evildoers Run Wild. But then again, guilds were dead, people were alive. The reason why Monarch Descends wanted to form a new guild was because he wanted to establish a new one. If Evildoers Run Wild forcefully disbanded the guild, not only would they have to pay a large sum of money, but they would also be playing into Monarch Descends' hands. For a moment, Evildoers Run Wild was at a loss. However, Wang Yu's expression was extremely calm. He looked outside the tower and said indifferently, "Don't worry. Let's wait here for a few more minutes." What are we waiting for? Are we going to be rescued by reinforcements in a few minutes? Evildoers Run Wild roared anxiously. Right now, there were tens of thousands of people standing outside. The entire city of Sin was packed to the brim, and even Wang Yu was trapped here. Who in the world could break through the encirclement and rescue him? That's right. Let's just wait. Wang Yu nodded with a smile. Fuck. Evildoers Run Wild grumbled gloomily. Once I get out of here, I'll reset my stats and add full agility to move unhindered outside the magic tower. When the players saw that their attacks were actually effective against the magic tower, they immediately understood Monarch Descends' intentions. Only when they knew what to do would they be able to attack properly. Therefore, everyone was overjoyed. Under Monarch Descends' command, They launched a second wave of attacks. Rumble, 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 rumble. When a second wave of attacks landed, the magic tower was like a leaf in the wind. It wriggled and wriggled as bricks and stones were blasted everywhere. Then came the third wave of attacks. It had to be said that the magic tower was the symbol of a main city. Although the city of Sin was only a town, the quality of the magic tower was still very good. After taking a few consecutive bombardments from Unhinder the World, it was on the verge of collapsing. Even though it was riddled with holes, it still stood firm, showing no signs of collapsing. Be it Wang Yu or the members of Reigning the World, they could all tell that the magic tower could not withstand more than a few waves of attacks. It's over, it's over. Evildoers Run Wild was at a loss when he saw that the magic tower was about to collapse. It's coming. Just as Evildoers Run Wild was muttering to himself, Wang Yu's expression suddenly tightened. He looked at the horizon and said to Evildoers Run Wild, "Summon your wings and prepare to fly. Let's go." Huh? Who's coming? Evildoers Run Wild followed Wang Yu's gaze and looked into the distance. He saw a few black dots on the horizon, flying towards the magic tower. When he saw the black figures, Evildoers Run Wild exclaimed, Isn't that Wuji and the others?" "Yes, it's them." Wang Yu nodded. "Fuck, what's the use of them coming?" Originally, Evildoers Run Wild still had a glimmer of hope. However, when he heard that it was Wuji and the others, Evildoers Run Wild once again showed a look of despair. Although the experts from the Chuanjin sect were strong, they weren't at the level where they could penetrate the heavens and the earth. Even a heaven-defying expert like Wang Yu was surrounded like a sandbag. Could it be that these guys were going to die together with him? Hee hee. What do you know? Chapter 1628. After hearing Lao Wang's words, Evildoers Run Wild looked into the distance again. At that moment, Wuji and the others were getting closer, and Evildoers Run Wild could see them more clearly. There was nothing wrong with Wuji and the others flying in the sky, but there was a dazzling white light beneath them. It was as if a plane had dropped a bomb. Everywhere they went was a mess, and the players outside the encirclement fled in all directions in shock as if they had seen a ghost. What the hell is going on? Did Bao San refine uranium-235 in the game? Evildoers Run Wild and Chuanjin had competed together before, so he naturally knew Bao San's occupation in real life. However, when Chuanjin and the others broke through the encirclement outside the magic tower, Evildoers Run Wild was instantly dumbfounded. What the F***CK? Each of these guys had a guard following behind them. This was 2F***King Shameless. When he saw his former formation of 10,000 people being torn apart by the guards led by Chuanjin and the others, Evildoers Run Wild felt very complicated. Indeed, even the strongest expert among players like Wang Yu would find it difficult to break through Unhindered's 10,000-man formation. However, there would always be someone stronger than you, and there would always be someone stronger than you. In front of the system guards, these players were no different from paper. Without the slightest bit of effort, the system guards slaughtered them all. The players on the forum often discussed, like primary school students, who was the strongest existence in the game. Was it the Dragon Emperor Dales, the Light God Luke, or the Great God Iron Ox who had stepped on them? Today, it was clear who was truly invincible in the world. This works too? After a long time, Evildoers Run Wild asked speechlessly. Clearly, this kid was beaten up so badly that he didn't even have the time to call for help, so he didn't know what was happening outside the tower. When he saw Wuji and the rest charging around with the guards, he found it hard to accept. Wang Yu glanced at Evildoers Run Wild and said, "Nonsense. How do you think we broke through the layers of encirclement and killed our way into the tower? Awesome. Too awesome. As expected of Boss Wuji, he's so evil that he has no conscience." Evildoers Run Wild sincerely praised. In the past, Evildoers Run Wild thought that Wuji was just a wretched cleric without any strength. There was no reason for a guild like the Blood Alliance to be afraid of Wuji. But now, Evildoers Run Wild finally understood why, when people talked about Wang Yu, They would always compare him to this cleric. Damn, cultured people are the most inhumane when they're angry. Monarch Descends the World was not the only one who was shocked by the sudden appearance of these monsters. He too was shocked when he saw the formation of his subordinates being scattered. He asked in astonishment, what's going on? When Sovereign Descends was inside the tower, he had only received news that someone had made it to the front of the tower. As for how they broke through the encirclement, Sovereign Descends was completely confused. Now that he saw Wuji and the others returning with the guards, he was naturally dumbfounded. It seems like their reinforcements have arrived. Black Sky and White Knight glanced at the guards charging back and forth on the streets. His expression immediately darkened. Sovereign Descends the World panicked. He didn't even bother to see who his opponent was. His eyes were bloodshot as he shouted, "Stop them! Stop them! Stop them! Stop them!" His eyes were bloodshot as he roared, "Stop them! Stop the guards?" No one knew who gave Sovereign Descends the courage to do so. Even a celestial boss could not withstand a single blow from the powerful guards, let alone a group of players. Under the leadership of Wuji and the others, the dozen or so city guards rampaged through the streets without the slightest scruple. It was as if there was no one there. As for the players from Reigning the World, they were like clay chickens and pottery dogs in the face of the city guards. They died as soon as they touched them. To move, unhindered players in the City of Sin were either dead or injured in just a few exchanges. The formation of the players surrounding the Mage Tower was also broken. To move, unhindered players were scared out of their wits under the tyranny of the guards. They cried and screamed as they ran for their lives, afraid that they would be trampled to death by the guards if they were too slow. In an instant, Unhindered's formation was thrown into chaos. No matter how Sovereign Descends the World shouted, it was already too late to turn the situation around. "Let's go." Seeing that the players outside the Mage Tower only cared about running for their lives and no longer had the mood to care about anything else, Wang Yu and the other two rushed out of the tower. Then, the two of them grabbed old Wang's shoulders, spread their wings, and soared into the sky. In the blink of an eye, they were out of the archer's shooting range. Retreat. In the sky, when Wuji and the others saw that Wang Yu had rescued Evildoers Run Wild, they immediately gave the order to retreat in the group chat. When the Chuanjin group received the order, they did not say anything else. They immediately left the guards behind and flew into the sky. Before they left, Mingdu did not forget to throw a few spells to liven things up. To move, unhindered players, who were already running away like rats, were even more troubled. The range of the guards' aggro was limited. In the beginning, the people from the Quanjun sect were within the guards' field of vision, so they naturally chased after them relentlessly. At this moment, the people from the Quanjun sect directly flew into the sky. The guard had no choice but to obediently return to his original post. F***CK. Looking at Evildoers Run Wild and Chuanjin group flying further and further away, the Sovereign Descends was so angry that he almost fainted. All their efforts had gone to waste. In order to kill Evildoers Run Wild, the Sovereign Descends had deliberately tricked Evildoers Run Wild into the City of Sin in the name of clearing contracts and expelling players from insane guilds. They had even set up a trap to ensure that nothing would go wrong. They had thought that they would be able to completely eliminate Evildoers Run Wild. However, just as the Sovereign Descends was about to succeed, a group of malefactors appeared. The Sovereign Descends felt bitter. It felt like they had just written 10,000 words and had not saved them when the power suddenly went out. They were so angry that they trembled. Of course, they did not know how angry they were if they did not write. Uncle Neo even smashed his computer because of this. Uncle Neo could still vent his anger on his computer, but what could the Sovereign Descends do about it? Kill the guards to vent their anger? What a joke. Hadn't they suffered enough? Continue to chase after Evildoers Run Wild. Stop messing around. Leaving aside the question of whether or not he could catch up to them, how many players in Unhindered the World could fly? It was not like the Sovereign Descends had never seen Wang Yu and the others' abilities. So what if they sent a few dozen people to chase after Evildoers Run Wild? In the end, they would still be the ones to embarrass themselves. Oh, in his anger, the sovereign descends could only let out a long roar. To move unhindered was so shocked that everyone turned to look at him. Fuck, is this bastard crazy? Huh. Chapter 16:29. The*MN. Something big happened. To move unhindered boss, evildoers run wild has been blocked. Evildoers run wild? No way. To move unhindered. Who dares to block him? Do they not want to live anymore? Haha. No one is going to stop him. It's his own subordinates. Right now, that brat is in the city of sin, and he's surrounded by 3 layers inside and 3 layers outside. Is that true? Haha. Interesting. A dog bites another dog. Even though Unhindered the World was a guild that did business, and usually kept a low profile, they were not very friendly towards players from other guilds, especially in the mining area. It would not be an exaggeration to describe the players from Unhindered the World as arrogant and despotic. To move unhindered players wasn't the only one. To move unhindered players, even players from big guilds have been bullied by them. Even someone like Wong, you had seen the aura of a player to move unhindered. But so what? To move unhindered was a huge guild that normal people couldn't afford to offend. Big guilds didn't want to offend such a huge entity, so they could only swallow their anger. To move unhindered, as the guild leader of evildoers run wild, his reputation naturally wasn't good. Moreover, this guy's reputation came from fighting for territory in the early stages. At this moment, when they heard that Unhindered was in a state of internal strife, and that a monster was running amok, surrounded by tens of thousands of his underlings like a stray dog, not only did the onlookers not feel any heartache, but they all laughed at the monster running amok. As for those large guilds, they've been eyeing the juicy piece of meat that was Unhindered for quite some time now. Naturally, everyone knew that Unhindered was in a state of internal strife. This was definitely a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If they didn't hit Unhindered while it was down, then when? After receiving news of Unhindered's internal strife, almost at the same time, all the major guilds in the main cities in the game, including the Blood Alliance, hurriedly held a guild meeting. Benefits were always paramount. Blood Red War Flag and Xuanjin had a good personal relationship, but such a large guild needed to eat and drink. After all, the later stages of a large guild's development depended on annexing smaller guilds. To move Unhindered did not just represent one guild, but also the entire mining area in the game. This was an absolute benefit. So how could Blood Red War Flag turn a blind eye? In other words, if Xuanjin was in Blood Alliance's position, they would have done the same thing. To move Unhindered, chaos ensued so quickly. Looks like evildoers run wild is still not good enough. Within the Blood Alliance office, the leaders of the Blood Alliance sighed about what had happened today. Indeed, to move Unhindered, it had always been calm and peaceful. It basically didn't care about the affairs of the world and didn't have much contact with the outside world. Who would have thought that there would suddenly be internal chaos? This was something that no one had expected. What's so surprising about this? Seeing everyone's expression, Bloodwind Whisperer pouted. The guild is so big, but it doesn't have any true faith and cohesion. It's only a matter of time before something happens. I think our top priority is to discuss what we should do. Oh, Bloodwind Whisperer still had a lot of power in Blood Alliance. These words were also heard by Blood Red War Flag. Hearing Bloodwind Whisperer say this, Blood Red War Flag asked with interest, "Then Wind Whisper, what do you think we should do?" "Do you even need to ask?" Bloodwind Whisperer pointed at the mining area on the map. To move Unhindered, their major forces are also restless. They definitely won't have time to care about the mining area. Of course, we have to go and snatch the mining area as soon as possible. Damn, Wind Whisperer, are you crazy? The other members of the Blood Alliance frowned when they heard this. Blood Azura, the dumbass, was even more shocked. Snatching Unhindered's territory, do you know how many people they have? To move Unhindered and gather 1,000,000 troops was something all newbies knew. Although Blood Red War Flag wasn't small, they only had tens of thousands of people. Wasn't it suicidal for tens of thousands of people to snatch the territory of millions of people? Oomph. Blood-Wind Whisperer snorted. To move unhindered with 1,000,000 troops is history. Now that they even dare to attack their own boss, the roots are already in chaos. The forces within the guild are definitely restless and watching each other. To move unhindered is called to move unhindered. To move unhindered without unity. Even Yu Huicheng won't be able to move unhindered. Wasn't that right? To move unhindered with 1,000,000 troops was the alliance of 300 main cities. However, when they were scattered across the 300 main cities, there were only a few thousand people in each main city. In the game, each main city was actually equivalent to a force. Other than having the title of boss, Evildoers Run Wild's power was basically scattered in the hands of various forces. To move unhindered at this time, even the boss was going to be slaughtered. The various forces definitely wouldn't act rashly and naturally wouldn't care about the other main cities. To move unhindered like this was nothing in front of Blood Alliance. Aren't you afraid of them finding trouble with us after the internal strife? Blood Dark Knight reminded carefully. A starving camel was still bigger than a horse. To move unhindered even if he was sick, once he recovered, Blood Alliance wouldn't be able to offend him. Find trouble with us? Hee hee. Blood-Wind Whisper smiled. Do you think that Blood Alliance is the only one keeping an eye on the territory? To move unhindered? Do you believe me when I say that every guild in the 300 main cities is plotting the same thing we are doing right now? Let's not talk about how unhindered won't be able to make a comeback in the future. Even if they do, they'll be greatly weakened. Do you think they have the guts to challenge all the guilds in the game? Bloodwind Whisper's words made everyone speechless. At this time, Blood Red War Flag, who hadn't spoken, thought for a while and said, Wind Whisper, I have actually considered all of this, but do you know what the relationship between Xuanjin and Evildoers Run Wild is? Of course I know, Bloodwind Whisper said, but so what? This is also forced by the situation. To move unhindered such a big piece of fat meat. Even if we don't fight for it, others will. Rather than letting other guilds take advantage of it, it's better to take advantage of us. I think Wuji and Iron Ox will understand this logic. Hee hee, this is what you said. When the time comes, when Xuanjin looks into it, I will sell you out. Blood Red War Flag smiled when he heard this. Bossy, you can't do this. Seeing the smile on Blood Red War Flag's face, Bloodwind Whisper couldn't help but be stunned. All right, Blood Red War Flag really wasn't a good person. This kid looked stupid, but he knew very well in his heart. After managing the guild for so many years, he naturally knew how to deal with this kind of thing. The reason why he didn't say it was because he was afraid of offending Xuanjin. He didn't expect him to be so insidious and push Bloodwind Whisper to the front. Bloodwind Whisper wanted to curse. Chapter 16:30. The temptation of getting a bigger share of the mine's profits was quite big. However, compared to offending Xuanjin, it was really a dilemma. Bloody Wind Whisper was in a dilemma. Seeing Bloody Wind Whisper's expression, Blood Red War Flag comforted it. You said it yourself. Even if we don't fight for it, someone else will. I know Iron Ox. He definitely won't bother you over such a small matter. I know that, Bloody Wind Whisperer said. But who can say for sure? What if Evildoers Run Wild makes a comeback? All of Bloody Wind Whisper's deductions were based on the fact that Evildoers Run Wild had been killed. To move unhindered was the reason why they had not split up yet, because Evildoers Run Wild was there to deter them. To move unhindered if Evildoers Run Wild could not make it through this time. To move unhindered would instantly collapse. By then, they would only need to solve the problem of miners. The mine would naturally belong to whoever had the biggest fist. Xuanjin could not find a reason for this. After all, the mine belonged to all the players and not the monsters. Evildoers Run Wild's enemy was his own subordinates, not these guilds that were trying to take advantage of him. However, if Rampage managed to pull through, that would be what everyone was most worried about. Rampage was still a very intimidating existence in the game. As long as his banner did not fall, Unhindered would not be disbanded. A scattered Unhindered might be easy to bully, but united unhindered would definitely be the strongest force in the game. Naturally, this mining area would still be the place where Rampage would run amok. Although evildoers Run Wild was surrounded like a dog, and the chance of him surviving was less than 1 in 10,000, there could not be any mistakes when it came to matters of life and death. Bloody Wind Whisperer was very calculative. It did not matter if he instigated others to do it, but it was another matter if he was the scapegoat. "Don't worry." Blood Red War Flag patted Bloody Wind Whisperer's shoulder and said, "Others might not know how strong evildoers Run Wild is, but to move unhindered wouldn't know. If they dare to block evildoers Run Wild, they must be prepared. Evildoers Run Wild has no chance." "Really?" Bloody Wind Whisperer rolled its eyes at Blood Red War Flag and said, "Do you think Shuanjin won't get involved?" Hearing Bloody Wind Whisperer's words, Blood Red War Flag felt a chill down its back. If the other guilds heard that the Quanjun sect was involved in this matter, they would definitely not think much of it. How much of a storm could a mere dozen or so people cause in a fight between millions of people? However, as the guild leader of a guild that had dealings with the Quanjun sect for many years, Blood Red War Flag knew how powerful those bastards from the Quanjun sect were. Let's not talk about Wang Yu, the world's #1 fighter who was ruthless enough to hunt down thousands of guilds for no reason. Just Wuji alone was enough to give everyone a hard time. Although in terms of skills, Wuji was much weaker than Wang Yu. His destructive power was not inferior to Wang Yu's. With these guys together, anything was possible. Perhaps with Shuanjin gone, evildoers Run Wild would really be able to make a comeback. Before they knew about the Quanjun sect, Blood Red War Flag used to treat these bandits as a bunch of jokes, but now, as an old neighbor of the Quanjun sect, Blood Red War Flag was definitely very serious about the Quanjun sect. "Should we rob the mine?" Blood Red War Flag asked after thinking for a moment. What a joke. What if he were to become a freak and make a comeback, offending both the Quanjun sect and unhindered world at the same time? That was no joke. "Rob, we have to," Blood Red Wind Whisperer said with certainty. "But we can't use this name to rob." "Oh, then how?" Blood Red War Flag was surprised. "Hee," Blood Red Wind Whisperer said. "We are brothers with Shuanjin. Isn't it our duty to help clean up the mess and surround the territory? If evildoers Run Wild makes a comeback, we'll just return it to him. If he can't, we'll help him develop it. Wouldn't that be great?" "Huh, that makes sense." Blood Red War Flag smiled when it heard what Blood Wind Whisperer said. They were really good at tactics. How could they make it sound so righteous? Blood Red War Flag was a straightforward person. Once they knew what to do, they immediately gave an order in the guild channel. "Everyone listen to my command. Go and help Brotherhood's guild." Blood Alliance and Shuanjin were old friends. If they could be so shameless in the face of benefits, the other guilds would be even more so. Seeing that evildoers Run Wild had lost, they knew that it was over for them. To move unhindered was finished. They didn't think that Blood Alliance would have such concerns and just started robbing. 300 guilds in the main cities attacked a guild that was an internal strife. It was quite a spectacular sight. To move unhindered, each main city had a few thousand players. Although they couldn't compare to the top guilds, they weren't small either. Once they started fighting, there'd be tens of thousands of players fighting. What was more terrifying was that it wasn't just in one main city. It was in all the main cities of the hero's continent. It was easy to imagine the scene when 300 main cities had a battle of this level at the same time. It was like the end of the world. The entire server was in a war zone, and people were killing people everywhere. What did it mean to pull one hair and affect the whole body? This was it. From this, it could be seen what kind of impact a guild like Unhindered would have on the game. Seeing such a situation, the game company was overjoyed. The gaming company could see that Unhindered the World was growing stronger by the day. A workshop of this scale could be said to be unprecedented. If Unhindered the World was allowed to grow, it would pose a direct threat to the profits of the gaming company. However, Unhindered the World did not violate any laws or regulations, so the gaming company could not find any reason to punish them. To move unhindered was what the game company wanted to see the most. Fighting and piking were all about resources and equipment. Such an all-out war was the best time for the game company to earn money. Some people were happy, while others were sad. To move unhindered players were the most regretful ones. To move unhindered the moment the mining war started. The various powers were in complete chaos. After being domineering for so long, unhindered the world had become a little overconfident. They thought that the other guilds in the game were just a bunch of nobodies that weren't even worth mentioning. They were so focused on pushing unhindered the world away that they forgot why the other guilds didn't dare to look them in the eye. Now that those large guilds had suddenly launched an attack, this group of restless fellows had been caught off guard. Chapter 16:31. At this point, Sovereign Descends couldn't care less about the fire in his backyard. To move unhindered before evildoers run wild escaped might still be in Sovereign Descends territory. To move unhindered now that evildoers run wild had escaped. How would Sovereign Descends still have anything to do with them? Right now, Sovereign Descends' mind was a complete mess. Right now, he was most worried that the other powers in Unhindered would side with the monstrous genius and target him. Unhindered was a small society, and it was a common occurrence for people to take advantage of someone who was down. The evildoer Rampage had escaped with his life, while the Sovereign descending the heavens had clearly lost the advantage of being the first to strike. As such, it was expected that anyone would attack the members of the Sovereign descending the heavens. Helpless, Sovereign Descends could only open up his friend's list and open the chat window. Boss, bad news. Evildoers run wild escaped. Escaped? The player on the other side was stunned for a long time when he saw Sovereign Descends' message. Didn't you say that it was a foolproof plan? I heard that tens of thousands of players are blocking the entrance to Sin City. How could evildoers run wild escape? Something's wrong. Sovereign Descends wiped the sweat off his forehead. We were so close to killing evildoers run wild. Who the hell knew that he had reinforcements? Reinforcements? The player on the other side pondered for a moment before saying, "How many reinforcements can break through your blockade? I've never heard of a large-scale group battle in Sin City." This, Sovereign Descends, was speechless. Not many, only a dozen or so. A dozen or so? Are you *King kidding me? Hearing Sovereign Descends' words, the tone of the player on the other side immediately changed. Sovereign Descends had brought tens of thousands of players to stop evildoers run wild. Moreover, he had come up with such a sinister plan to leave evildoers run wild, isolated, and without reinforcements. But now, Sovereign Descends was saying that evildoers run wild had been rescued by a dozen or so players. This was no longer a matter of whether Sovereign Descends believed him or not. He was obviously questioning Sovereign Descends' intelligence. Even if Sovereign Descends the heavens claimed that evildoers run wild had over 100,000 helpers, it would still be acceptable. At the very least, it wouldn't be so ridiculous. More than 10 people saved one person from thousands of soldiers and horses. Did they treat themselves as trash or others as idiots? That's right. More than 10 of them. Sovereign Descends was an honest man. Even in the face of the other party's doubt, he still replied with confidence. Every one of them is a top-tier expert. Moreover, they lured a dozen or so system guards over and broke up my men's formation. System guards. Hearing the words system guard, the person on the other end of the line clearly believed Sovereign Descends' words a little. He then said, "Then why are you sending me a message instead of chasing after him? I'm paying you to do something for me, not to cause trouble." "I know," Sovereign Descends replied helplessly. "To move unhindered right now, there's a fire in our backyard. The mining area is being fought over by the guilds of all the major cities." "Is that so?" The other party was stunned when he heard Sovereign Descends' words. "Motherfucker, these bastards really know how to fish in troubled waters. The mining area is going to be gone soon. Should we continue with our plan?" Sovereign Descends asked again. To move unhindered mining areas, Sovereign Descends had been instructed by someone to rebel. Now that the mining areas of 300 major cities were being targeted, there was naturally no reason for them to continue. About that, the player on the other end of the line pondered for a moment before saying, Log off right now and post on the forums. Say that evildoers run wild has killed all of your men. This sovereign descend was stunned. That's not appropriate, right? Wouldn't that be telling everyone that I've been suppressed by evildoers run wild? Those bastards from Unhindered had always been swayed by the wind. They would always side with whoever had the upper hand. Now that the evildoer had escaped, it was undoubtedly a fatal blow to Monarch Descends the World. Monarch Descends the World couldn't wait to cover up the truth. If they were to announce this matter to the world, wouldn't they be digging a hole for themselves? What do you know? The other party snorted coldly. To move unhindered mining areas in the past. Do you know why no one dared to move unhindered? Why? Sovereign Descends was puzzled. Because as long as the evildoers are running amok, you will not be like a plate of loose sand. Who would dare to fight with you for territory? What do you mean? Sovereign Descends asked, not really understanding. As long as we tell everyone that evildoers run wild has quelled the internal strife, the guilds are fighting over the mining areas will definitely be sitting on pins and needles. The mining areas in their hands will also be a hot potato. When the time comes, these guilds will definitely not keep the mining areas in their hands. They will definitely throw them to me. To move unhindered, then what about the other forces? At the end of the day, Sovereign Descend's brain had yet to wrap itself around the situation. To move unhindered, the other forces would help evildoers run wild to deal with him. Are you stupid? The player on the other end of the line sighed and said angrily, to move unhindered is what we want. Those old friends of yours have long since been beaten senseless. Who cares who is stronger between you and evildoers run wild? This, after hearing the other party's words, Sovereign Descends finally understood a little. The boss's goal was very clear: to move unhindered 300 mining areas in major cities. After all, fighting a war burned money. Equipment, supplies, potions, etc. Which one of them wasn't gold and silver? With the boss's methods, not to mention the fact that he wasn't a match for evildoers run wild. Even if he could win against evildoers run wild, when he woke up, to move unhindered against millions of players would definitely be a fierce battle. How many resources would it take to fight such a large group battle? That definitely wouldn't work. The mining areas were evildoers run wild's cash cow, and evildoers run wild was also someone who had seen the world. There was no way someone like him would kill the goose that laid the golden eggs. After all, this was only the early stages of the game. The true consumption of materials would come in the later stages of the game. Wasn't it ridiculous to sell the mining areas before they were at the peak of their power? To move unhindered, the boss of Sovereign Descends wanted Sovereign Descends to replace evildoers run wild and take down the mining areas without losing a single soldier. Who knew that evildoers run wild would be able to escape under such circumstances, and the other big guilds would hit them when they were down. But this way, the mining areas would become a hot potato. If they took it, evildoers run wild could easily quell the internal strife. It was clear that he was ruthless. No one could afford to offend him. If they didn't take it, they had fought so hard to get it, and they would be unwilling to just throw it away for no reason. At this time, if the boss bought it at a low price, it was basically giving the big guilds a way out. Although the total value of the mining areas from 300 guilds was definitely not cheap, compared to buying it directly from evildoers run wild, these mining areas were practically free. Chapter 1632. Since the boss had made such an appropriate arrangement, Sovereign Descent naturally had no more doubts. As such, he immediately ordered everyone to log off in the party channel and go to the forums to announce that evildoers run wild had defeated him. Tens of thousands of players being killed by a dozen players was naturally not something to be proud of. Sovereign Descent's subordinates were actually quite against Sovereign Descent's decision. However, they couldn't change the fact that Sovereign Descent was the boss now. Everyone was on the same boat now. They couldn't run away even if they wanted to. Moreover, Sovereign Descent was also an expert at painting a picture. With an unfathomable expression, he told everyone that as long as they did as he said, they would definitely live a good life in the future. The reason why everyone followed sovereign descent was because they wanted a better future. The temptation this time was quite great, so they no longer complained and logged off. At the same time, in the City of Sin's leveling area, Wang Yu's group found a secluded place to stop after seeing that there were no longer any pursuers. Although Evildoers Run Wild subordinates had rebelled, as the leader of the guild, Evildoers Run Wild still had a large number of loyal subordinates. With such a huge incident happening in the guild, Evildoers Run Wild subordinates were naturally not stupid. At this moment, Evildoers Run Wild's message window was already exploding with messages. All of the messages were the same, with only two meanings. In the beginning, all of them were asking, "Boss, how are you doing? Where are you now? We're going to save you." Then there were anxious messages saying, "Boss, our mining area has been snatched away by those big guilds." Seeing the first part of the message, Evildoers Run Wild was a little touched. At the very least, not all of his subordinates were traitors. However, when he saw the second part of the message, Evildoers Run Wild's heart turned cold. To move unhindered in rebirth was to establish a foothold in those mining areas. As long as there were mining areas, there would be an iron rice bowl. To move unhindered even if sovereign descends revolted against them. As long as the mining areas were still there, there would be no need to worry about a lack of miners. After all, mining players had to support their families. It was a matter of course that they would follow whoever gave them food. However, now that the mines had been snatched away by other guilds, Evildoers Run Wild's foundation had been snatched away. Naturally, the major guilds would not be short on manpower. Even if the players of Unhindered had the guts to not work for the major guilds would not be worried about the development of the mining area. To move Unhindered aside from the old members of Evildoers Run Wild, most of them were temporary workers. They didn't care about who was the boss. They only cared about whether they could earn money from mining. Therefore, when he heard that someone had taken advantage of the situation to loot the mine, the evildoer rampage immediately deflated like a balloon. Just a moment ago, he had been so confident that he could make a comeback after quelling the rebellion. But now, he was filled with despair. The people of Chuanjin were all wily old foxes. Taking advantage of a burning house was their basic operation. To move unhindered, the people of Chuanjin naturally knew what the other guilds would do after such a huge incident. Seeing Evildoers Run Wild's expression, they instantly guessed what was going on. Looking at the despair on Evildoers Run Wild's face, everyone could understand how Evildoers Run Wild felt. It was as if his own brother had quarreled with him, and his backyard had been robbed by his neighbor. Although Chuanjin had never experienced this kind of grievance before, they could imagine it. After all, this group of people had caused others to feel grievance in the past. Everyone was silent. Only old Wang and Wang Yu patted Evildoers Run Wild's shoulder. They wanted to comfort this pitiful child, but they didn't know where to start. Damn it! After a long while, Evildoers Run Wild stood up from the ground with a whoosh. He immediately said with bloodshot eyes, "Damn it, I'm going to fight this group of bastards to the death." Then, Evildoers Run Wild spread his wings and was about to fly back to the city to fight his enemies to the death. Calm down, calm down. When Wang Yu and old Wang saw this, they were shocked. They hurriedly stretched out their hands and forcefully pressed Evildoers Run Wild to the ground. What was going on? They had rescued this fellow with great difficulty, but this fellow wanted to go back and die. He was not respecting the fruits of everyone's labor. Don't stop me. At this moment, Evildoers Run Wild was also furious. He did not listen to anyone who tried to stop him. He swung his hands with all his might and shouted, "If I don't kill those bastards, I'll write my surname backwards." The strength of a grandmaster of combat, like Evildoers Run Wild, was still very terrifying. Even Wang Yu and old Wang were no match for him in terms of strength. The two top-notch experts were shaken back and forth by Evildoers Run Wild, causing everyone in Chuanjin to be dumbfounded. Don't stop him. Let him die. If he dies, I won't have to think of a way for him. Just as Evildoers Run Wild could not restrain his anger, a familiar and cold voice suddenly traveled into the ears of Wang Yu and the other two from behind. When he heard this voice, Evildoers Run Wild was instantly dumbfounded. Then, he and Wang Yu turned their heads at the same time and saw Wu Ji looking at them with a look of disdain. When he saw that the person who had spoken was Wu Ji, Wang Yu hesitated for a moment and casually let go of Evildoers Run Wild. Wang also let go of his hand. Meanwhile, Evildoers Run Wild quietened down and asked in disbelief, "Boss Wu Ji, what did you just say? You have a way?" "That's right," Wu Ji said indifferently. "As long as you don't die right now, there's still a chance to turn this around. If you go and die now, then you'll just have to wait for someone else to take over your territory." "Well, what do you mean by that?" Evildoers Run Wild was dumbfounded. "Mph." Wu Ji sneered. "Why do you think sovereign descent rebelled against you? To move unhindered minds. Now that the mines have been robbed, sovereign descent must be even more anxious than you are. After all, if you lose, you'll only lose your guild. If the mines are robbed, not only will he lose his guild, but he'll also have an enemy like you." Hearing this, Evildoers Run Wild couldn't help but be stunned. Wasn't that right? Whether it was in the game or in real life, traitors were the most annoying people. Sovereign Descent risked being hunted down by Evildoers Run Wild and being criticized by everyone in the world for their rebellion. But in the end, they came up empty-handed. What was their goal? At this moment, Sovereign Descent was much more anxious than Evildoers Run Wild. What's the point of him being anxious? Don't tell me he can still take back the mines? Evildoers Run Wild asked after thinking for a moment. Oh, Wu Ji didn't answer Evildoers Run Wild's question. Instead, he raised his eyebrows and said, "You should know what Sovereign Descent is capable of, right? Do you think he has the guts to rebel against you so easily?" Chapter 1633. Obviously, it's a done deal, Wu Ji said indifferently. Even though Evildoers Run Wild was weaker than Wang Yu, he was still an expert who could crush any normal player. To move unhindered, Sovereign Descends was a force to be reckoned with. It was obvious that he was one of Evildoers Run Wild's capable subordinates. Naturally, he had a good understanding of Evildoers Run Wild's capabilities. To move unhindered, Sovereign Descends' income was definitely not low. No matter how ambitious Sovereign Descends was, they still had to think twice before doing anything. To move unhindered, tens of thousands of underlings might be a terrifying force to other guilds, but they were minuscule in the face of a colossus like Sovereign Descends. No matter how you looked at it, the chances of Sovereign Descends succeeding in his rebellion were not high. Under these circumstances, who would offend a fearsome expert like Evildoers Run Wild for no reason? Not to mention, this expert had such a large group of underlings. Was it because money was easy to earn, or was it because life was not easy? In Unhindered, there were many powers stronger than Sovereign's Descent. However, everyone knew how high the success rate of going against a monster like Rampage was, and how severe the consequences would be if they failed. Sovereign Descends dared to take the lead. It was obvious that he had found a backing and a way out for himself. Otherwise, he wouldn't have taken a lead so easily. Damn it, this traitorous thing. Evildoers Run Wild couldn't help but curse after hearing Wu Ji's words. However, Wu Ji laughed and said, "Actually, it's not necessarily a bad thing for him to be a traitor. Fuck, you can't be like this." Wang Yu's face darkened. "My brother's underling is already a traitor, and you're still making sarcastic remarks." Yeah, Wu Ji, that old dog, always likes to gloat. How despicable. The other people in Xuanzhen also curled their lips and expressed their disdain for Wu Ji's behavior. Only the evildoer, Hung Xing, seemed to be deep in thought as he asked, "Brother Wu Ji, did you notice something?" "Not bad." Wu Ji nodded with satisfaction and said, "After all, you used to be a big boss. Your vision is better than this group of country bumpkins." F***CK your grandpa. Who are you calling a country bumpkin? When the people of the Xuanzhen sect heard this, they couldn't help but become restless. They had the intention of pressing Wu Ji old dog to the ground and giving him a good beating. Wu Ji shrugged, spread his hands, and said with a smile, "Look, I didn't even say who the country bumpkin was, and the country bumpkin took it to heart." Fuck, Everyone was speechless, and they resisted the urge to beat this brat up. After the disturbance from Chuanjin, Evildoers Run Wild's originally gloomy mood improved a lot, and he also calmed down. He moved closer to Wuji and asked, "Brother Wuji, what did you see?" Wuji said with a smile, "A piece of trash like Sovereign Descends isn't very useful. Now that this mess is out of his control, his boss behind the scenes will definitely come out and clean up his mess." Makes sense. After hearing Wuji's explanation, Evildoers Run Wild touched his chin thoughtfully. Indeed, to move unhindered, Sovereign Descends and Evildoers Run Wild's internal relations instantly fell apart. To move unhindered now was like a plate of loose sand. If they wanted to control the situation, they needed someone who could gather the loose sand together. To move unhindered was obvious. Apart from Evildoers Run Wild, the other powers in the guild refused to submit to anyone, let alone a traitor like Sovereign Descends. Therefore, the only player who could control the situation was Evildoers Run Wild. The boss of Sovereign Descends obviously didn't put in so much effort just to hurt others. Now that the mine had been robbed, there was no way he would let it go so easily. "What should we do now?" Evildoers Run Wild thought for a moment before asking. "Do you want me to show my face on the forums and tell everyone that Sovereign Descends doesn't have the ability to defeat me?" It wasn't hard to see that Evildoers Run Wild was a smart person. He knew what to do in this situation. No need. However, Wuji waved his index finger and said, "At a time like this, whoever takes the lead first will be the one to take the cake. Our enemy isn't the big guilds, but the power behind Sovereign Descends. All we need to do now is wait and see." As the saying went, the onlookers see the game more clearly than the players. Wuji had a much clearer view of the current situation than Evildoers Run Wild. Rampage was different from the boss behind Monarch Descends the World. The boss behind Monarch Descends the World wanted to take over the mines with the least amount of effort, whereas Unhindered the World wanted to take back the mines that originally belonged to them. To move unhindered was a force to be reckoned with. After putting in so much effort, they naturally wouldn't just hand over the mine in their hands obediently. To move unhindered by Evildoers Run Wild, taking the initiative to challenge these big guilds might incite public anger and draw even more hatred for themselves. To move unhindered was like a hungry tiger falling prey to a pack of wolves. No matter how capable they were, they wouldn't be able to draw so much hatred. At that time, the boss behind Sovereign Descends would definitely take advantage of the situation. They might even be able to take the mine without paying a single cent and reshuffle the power balance of the guilds in Heroes Continent. After all, mining was like a rice bowl. Miners didn't care who their boss was. They only cared about who gave them their rice bowl. The Quanjin sect had dominated the gaming circle for a long time, so everyone knew what kind of temper Wuji had. This person would eat anything, but he would never suffer a loss. Naturally, he would not let a monster like Rampage do such an obvious loss. Wait and see. Is that possible? Evildoers Run Wild's originally clear mind started to become muddled again. "Don't worry and wait," Wuji said calmly. "We'll probably see the results soon." Fine. The more capable Wang Yu was, the more dirty Wuji was. Evildoers Run Wild understood this very well. Since Wuji had already said so, Evildoers Run Wild had no choice but to listen to Wuji's opinion. Meanwhile, after Sovereign Descends logged off with his underlings, he went straight to the local server forums. To move unhindered, the players on the forums were still discussing how to fight for territory with the big guilds without hesitation. The members of Sovereign Descends started spreading the news of Evildoers Run Wild's ruthlessness and success in quelling the rebellion. The strength of a Ghost Rider army of tens of thousands of players was quite terrifying. In less than a few minutes, the thread about Evildoers Run Wild taking care of Sovereign Descends quickly became the top of the forums and a new topic of discussion among the players. Holy shit, amazing. How did Evildoers Run Wild flatten Sovereign Descends in this situation? Of course. Don't you know who Evildoers Run Wild is? How can he lead such a big guild if he doesn't have some skill? For a time, the players on the forums were in a different direction. Chapter 1634. To move unhindered, evildoers run wild's turnaround was completely unexpected. After all, everyone knew exactly what kind of situation evildoers run wild was in at the time. He was surrounded by tens of thousands of players like a dog, yet he was still able to turn things around. When the news first came out, everyone thought it was just a rumor. Fuck, didn't that mean that the sun had risen from the west? However, with tens of thousands of players saying the same thing, even if it was a rumor, there wouldn't be a wave without a wind. After confirming it over and over again, the bosses of the various guilds finally realized that it wasn't just a rumor. Not only did evildoers run wild escape under the watchful eyes of everyone, even Monarch Descends and his subordinates had suddenly vanished from the face of the earth. The last time they logged into the game was when they surrounded evildoers run wild, City of Sin. All of these signs pointed to the fact that not only had Monarch Descends and his subordinates been defeated by evildoers run wild, they had suffered a crushing defeat. Everyone had been forced to log out of the game and not even dare to show their faces. Bloody hell, internal strife had always been a headache for all guilds. After all, the larger a guild was, the more power the guild leader would have, and the harder it would be to manage the guild. With the Three Fiends Manor as a prime example, it was only natural that they had to be on guard. Even so, when internal strife occurred in a guild, it would take at least 3 to 5 days to resolve the mess. Some of the weaker guild leaders might not even be able to resolve the problem in a month. In fact, there were many guilds that had fallen apart due to internal strife. To move unhindered, less than 2 hours had passed since news of internal strife appeared on the forums to the post announcing evildoers run wild success in quelling the rebellion. Unhindered was a rebellion of tens of thousands of players. Just the number of players in the rebellion alone was already more than the total number of players in all the major guilds combined. Yet, the Demon Rampage had managed to quell the rebellion of tens of thousands of players in such a short amount of time, and even kicked them out of the game. His actions were swift, and his methods were unheard of. What was even more frightening was that evildoers run wild subordinates were busy fighting over mines with other guilds. In other words, evildoers run wild had dealt with tens of thousands of Monarch Descends players without anyone's help. Just thinking about it was terrifying. What a terrifying person he was. Of course, how terrifying was evildoers run wild strength. The most important thing was that evildoers run wild had not fallen yet. To move unhindered meant that this behemoth would be able to rise again very soon. After unhindered the world pulled itself together, the ownership of the mines that had yet to be warmed up in everyone's hands was still uncertain. Everyone knew the temperament of Rampant, the evildoer, and the personality of Unhindered the world. They were all guild players, so it wasn't like they didn't know about it. How could Unhindered let them off so easily after stealing something from them? However, they definitely wouldn't be willing to give it up just like that. Putting aside the fact that they had spent a lot of effort to snatch the mines, even if they ignored that, all the major guilds were in the game. Who wouldn't care about their reputation? This was especially true for these major guilds. Everyone viewed their reputation as more important than anything else. If they obediently handed over the mines, it wouldn't be as simple as losing a single mine. What the F*** CK? If they were so cowardly, why would they still play as a guild? Players in the game were the most realistic. No matter how good your benefits were, if your guild was labeled as a coward, it would definitely cause a serious loss of players. After all, to a player, you could say that they were poor, ugly, and single, but you definitely couldn't say that they were a coward. Players were the guild's labor force. Without players, how could a guild still be called a guild? To move unhindered, the mines that they had snatched over really became a hot potato. Throw it away. They couldn't bear to. If they didn't throw it away, it would be poisonous. Whoever wasn't afraid of death would eat it. At this moment, the ones who were the most devastated were the people from Blood Alliance. Damn, what was there to be afraid of? Who would have thought that Xuanjin would be able to save evildoers run wild in the end? Damn, is there anything that these bastards can't do? After repeatedly confirming the authenticity of the news, Blood Red War Flag sat down on a chair and repeated this sentence over and over again. If other guilds snatched it, then so be it. After all, the mines didn't belong to evildoers run wild. It was reasonable for those with bigger fists to snatch it. However, with the relationship between Blood Alliance and Chuanjin, Blood Red War Flag still snatched evildoers run wild's mines. This was a bit unkind. Wasn't this stabbing their friend in the back? For a moment, Blood Red War Flag's face turned red. They didn't know how to explain this to Wang Yu. I think this is a bit fishy. Just as Blood Red War Flag was at a loss, Bloodwind Whisper looked at the screenshots of the post a few times and came to a conclusion. Oh, what's fishy? To move unhindered after evildoers run wild left. People saw the rebel army disappear with their own eyes. How is this fishy? Blood Red War Flag was confused. I'm not sure. Bloodwind Whisper rubbed his chin and muttered, Anyway, I just feel that something is wrong. Since evildoers run wild left Chuanjin, then this kid must be with Boss Wuji. This kind of big talk isn't Wuji's style. I think you should find someone else to confirm it. I've already confirmed it dozens of times. Who else should I find? Blood Red War Flag asked unhappily. Of course it's Chuanjin, Bloodwind Whisper said. They're the ones involved, so of course they have a right to speak. Chuanjin? Blood Red War Flag was speechless. Do you think Wuji and Iron Ox will turn on us if they know we also snatch the mines? If it's Wuji, they probably won't. As for Iron Ox, Bloodwind Whisper rubbed his chin and thought. At most, they'll kill you a few times. F***CK? Blood Red War Flag collapsed. Then I won't ask anymore. Aha, just kidding. Seeing this, Bloodwind Whisper laughed. At this time, if evildoers run wild really quelled the rebellion, then we'll just report the truth according to the original story. Okay. As Blood Red War Flag said this, he opened Wuji's friend list and sent a message. Boss Wuji, I heard that you rescued the monster boss? Yeah. Wuji was a smart person. As soon as he saw the content of Blood Red War Flag's message, he guessed that Blood Red War Flag was here to inquire about the situation. So, he smiled and replied calmly. Yes, why? To move unhindered minds to? Chapter 1635. Blood Red War Flag's bullshit would not even work on a kid, let alone in front of Wuji. However, Wuji could guess Blood Red War Flag's intentions when they snatched the mine. Right now, Blood Red War Flag's words obviously meant that they wanted to respectfully hand over the mine. Of course, Wuji would not pursue the matter, so he casually replied, I see. Thank you for your help, War Flag. I'll treat you to a drink some other day. In the end, Wuji even added a funny emoticon, _ at the end of the message. Seeing Wuji's reply, Blood Red War Flag let out a long sigh of relief. The rock in their hearts was finally lifted. Obviously, Blood Red War Flag knew that Wuji had seen through their intentions. However, they were both smart people. If they did not say anything, they would still be good friends. Naturally, Wuji gave Blood Red War Flag a way out of this embarrassing situation. Don't say that. Seeing that the matter was over, Blood Red War Flag hurriedly said, Chuanjin and to move unhindered are brother guilds, and Blood Alliance is also brother guilds. Our guilds are also brother guilds. It's only right for brothers to help each other. Hee hee. Seeing Blood Red War Flag's reply, Wuji smiled. He then said to evildoers run wild, See, I told you that the mastermind behind the Sovereign Descends would not be able to hold back and clean up after the Sovereign Descends. You don't even need to do anything. Everyone knows that you've taken care of the Sovereign Descends. Really? Evildoers run wild had an expression of disbelief. He never would have thought that the mastermind behind the Sovereign Descends would act so quickly. Of course, Wuji said confidently, and this person will be exposed very soon. On the other side, Blood Red War Flag was just about to praise Bloodwind Whisper after successfully glossing over the matter of the mine when a friend request popped up. System notice. Absent Son has sent you a friend request. As the leader of a big guild, being added as a friend was something that happened every day, so it was not strange for Blood Red War Flag. However, what was strange was that Absent Sun's note said, Guild Leader Blood Red, I have a deal that will benefit you. Would you like to take it? Business? Seeing Absent Sun's remark, Blood Red War Flag was slightly taken aback. Blood Red War Flag was also a guild leader. Although his IQ was lower than Wuji's, he was still slightly higher than the average person. What business could the Blood Alliance have in their hands? Could it be that they were talking about the mining area that they had just snatched from Unhindered the World? To move unhindered, Wang Yu, evildoers run wild, and Blood Red War Flag didn't dare to offend anyone. Now that he had decided to return the mine, he definitely wouldn't think about selling it. Blood Red War Flag was just about to reject him, but then they thought about it. Just as they felt that the mine was a problem, someone else immediately came to discuss a deal. This was too much of coincidence. To move unhindered, could it be that this guy was the one going against them? Thinking of this, Blood Red War Flag immediately agreed and accepted Absent Sun's application. At the same time, Absent Sun sent a message. Are you the leader of Blood Red War Flag? Yes. There were no duplicate names in the game. Don't you know Chinese? Blood Red War Flag asked angrily. Sorry, this is my first time here. Please forgive me for not going out to greet you. Absent Sun quickly sent another inexplicable message. Hey, what kind of nonsense is this? If you don't know how to use idioms, then don't randomly use them, okay? Blood Red War Flag was speechless. Look at your wording. Are you a primary school student? What business do you have with me? Do you want me to hire you with a high salary? It wasn't that Blood Red War Flag had never experienced this before. There had been more than one primary school student who pretended to be a god and privately messaged Blood Red War Flag, asking them to hire them with a high salary. The first time they encountered this, Blood Red War Flag was almost fooled. No, Absent Sun decisively denied. I really have a business to do with Leader Blood. Is that so? Blood Red War Flag thought for a moment. Then just say it. I don't like to beat around the bush. Leader Blood is such a cheerful person. What you want to say is cheerful. Blood Red War Flag was speechless again. You can say that. Absent Sun casually covered up his slip of the tongue and then asked, Does Leader Blood have a mind? As expected, seeing Absent Sun's message, Blood Red War Flag's eyes tightened. He calmly replied, That's right. May I ask what business you have with me? Absent Sun was also a straightforward person. He directly said, We, the Dark Alliance, intend to buy it. I don't know if Leader Blood is willing to sell it. Dark Alliance? Is there such a guild? Blood Red War Flag was a little confused when they heard the guild that Absent Sun mentioned. As the leader of a large guild like the Blood Alliance, Blood Red War Flag was very familiar with the first-rate guilds in the country. They had never heard of such a vulgar and ugly name as the Dark Alliance. Yes, it was just formed yesterday, Absent Sun said. This doesn't conflict with our business, right? Business? Huh. Blood Red War Flag laughed. I wonder how sincere you are. We are very sincere, Absent Sun directly replied. Blood Red War Flag was a little confused. Why did this Absent Sun look like he did not understand human language? When the word sincere was mentioned when discussing business, even an idiot wouldn't know that it was about the price. Yet, this guy actually replied with such a sentence. Wasn't this guy just messing around when discussing business? Then can you show it a little? Blood Red War Flag asked, suppressing his depression. Sincerity? How should I show it? Absent Sun asked in a silly manner. Damn, are you really stupid or just pretending? Blood Red War Flag said helplessly. Tell me your price. So, sincerity is the price. Absent Sun said with a sudden realization. 500,000 gold coins. F*CKU. Seeing Absent Sun's bid, Blood Red War Flag could not help but spit out a mouthful of profanity. Damn it, this was a mine, not one or two pieces of equipment. A mere 500,000 gold coins was like buying a mine. Even beggars did not have to pay so little. Since he dared to offer such a price, it could be seen that this guy called Absent Sun was not a fool. He was just making fun of himself. Blood Red War Flag would not be polite to such a person. However, Absent Sun was not angry at all. Instead, he said calmly, "This price is already very high. I think Blood Red War Flag has no reason to refuse." "Why?" Blood Red War Flag asked unhappily. This was such a large mine. People would fight to sell it for 5 million gold coins. Who gave him the confidence to be so arrogant when he offered 500,000? Oomph. Chapter 1636. Oh, Blood Red War Flag was surprised to hear this. They didn't expect Absent Sun to come prepared. Indeed, everyone knew that Evildoers Run Wild was still alive and kicking. To move unhindered was only a matter of time. When that time came, wouldn't they be punished one by one? Although the guilds fighting for the mines were all large guilds with a relatively large number of players, at the end of the day, these players did not belong to a single guild. They were not a group either. Normally, they would be lucky if they did not wish for each other's deaths. At a time like this, it was complete nonsense for them to ally together and resist unhindered. In most cases, as long as the matter didn't happen to them, they wouldn't care. To move unhindered now, if they really came back to fight for territory, no one would be able to stop them. As for the mines that had been robbed, of course, no one really dared to develop them. Even if they held on to them, it would be a disaster. It was just like how, if Overlord Chu hadn't died, Liu Bang wouldn't have dared to become the emperor. If it weren't for the fact that the big guilds had spent a lot of effort fighting for territory, someone would have returned the mines. Well, for example, didn't Blood Red War Flag already plan to do so? Blood Red War Flag thought for a moment and laughed. "You guys are here to rob a burning house. Boss, you're wrong." Towards Blood Red War Flag's words, Absent Sun flatly denied. "How can this be called looting a burning house? This is a market demand. Strictly speaking, your guild is only helping us with some work. 500,000 gold is not a small amount." It had to be said that although Absent Sun's words were a bit problematic, his mind was still clear. Blood Red War Flag couldn't refute him. Thinking about it carefully, it was true. The big guilds didn't dare to use the mines themselves. It wasn't like they were working for the guilds that dared to use them. In this case, 500,000 gold coins wasn't a low employment fee. However, there was a difference between being forced to work and taking the initiative to work. It was business, after all. Who didn't want to work for them? The former was a form of forced buying and selling. Whether it was in the game or in real life, being forced to do certain things would always make people unhappy. Even if it was for their own good, it was inevitable that they would be unwilling. But so what? To move unhindered revenge was what everyone should be worried about now, and not the Dark Alliance that was taking advantage of the situation. To move unhindered and beat them up so they could snatch back the mine and make a fool of themselves, or to collect money and sell the mine at a low price. It was a very easy choice to make. Even if everyone was very unwilling, they could only suffer in silence. Blood Red War Flag was also a guild leader. Hearing Absent Sun's words, Blood Red War Flag's reaction was the same as the other guild leaders. They were quite displeased. However, Blood Red War Flag didn't retort or refuse the trade on the spot. Instead, it calmly said, "You're right. However, your actions have made me very unhappy. So, I plan to reconsider whether to sell it to you or not." Absent Sun was also very understanding and said, "I understand how you're feeling right now, Bloody Red Boss. You could go ahead and think about it. However, time is limited, so don't even think about raising the price. Furthermore, the mining area in your hands might not be worth a single cent. Since our Dark Alliance dares to take over these mining areas, we have the right to negotiate with you." All right. Using bluff and intimidation was a common tactic used by large guilds when negotiating with smaller guilds. Blood Red War Flag had been in the game for a long time, but this was the first time someone had played this trick. The meaning behind Absent Sun's words was very clear. To move unhindered, there was an 80% chance that the mining area would be snatched back. The meaning behind his words was extremely arrogant. He was indirectly telling Blood Red War Flag that if the Dark Alliance had the ability to go against them, they naturally had the ability to snatch the mining area with their own hands. To move unhindered was to talk terms with Blood Red War Flag, so they naturally had the ability to snatch the mining area with their own hands. Hee. Then let's just take it one step at a time. Blood Red War Flag casually replied with a dark expression, then closed the conversation window. They pulled out Wuji again and anxiously shouted, "Boss Wuji, there's a situation." Even though the Blood Red War Flag was not a good person, they were still rather loyal. Not to mention the fact that Absent Sun's unyielding attitude and forceful selling made the Blood Red War Flag unhappy. Even if Absent Sun had licked the Blood Red War Flag's ass, the Blood Red War Flag would not have thought of selling the mine to the Dark Alliance. After all, Blood Red War Flag and Xuanjin had already discussed the matter of the mining area, and this Dark Alliance was obviously the one who had stabbed them in the back. To move unhindered, Wuji was magnanimous and did not mind the Blood Red War Flag's actions of snatching the mining area. Logically speaking, Blood Red War Flag would not take the initiative to stand against the people of Xuanjin. The fish has taken the bait. Receiving Blood Red War Flag's message, Wuji raised his eyebrows slightly and muttered to the crowd. He then replied, "Is someone looking for you to buy the mining area?" Ah. Seeing Wuji's message, Blood Red War Flag had a look of shock on his face. "You? How did you know?" Wuji said calmly. "I guessed. Someone spread the news, and naturally, someone would take advantage of the situation." "Awesome. Awesome." Hearing this, Blood Red War Flag sent a heartfelt thumbs-up emoji. At the same time, they felt a chill down their spine. Damn it, it was said that it was easy to talk to smart people. However, it was not easy to talk to a smart person like Wuji. It was terrifying. It felt as if they were talking to someone who could read minds. Their entire body was being seen clearly, and they would feel uncomfortable if there were any differences in punctuation. Just as Blood Red War Flag was thinking about it, Wuji sent another message. He asked, "Then who is this guild that dares to take advantage of the situation in front of so many big guilds?" "Dark Alliance." Blood Red War Flag replied without hesitation. "Dark Alliance?" Seeing this extremely unfamiliar guild name, Wuji could not help but frown. In Wuji's mind, a guild that dared to initiate a civil war in the reigning over the world, and even dare to take advantage of the situation at this time, had to be a top-tier guild. Its scale and reputation would not be any lower than the Blood Alliance. However, Wuji had never heard of the Dark Alliance before. As the saying goes, know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. No matter how cunning Wuji was, he had to understand the other party's general information before he could come up with a plan. However, for this enemy, other than the vulgar name, Wuji basically knew nothing about them. He had never even heard of them before. This kind of opponent was a little hard to deal with. "Hey," Wuji looked around and asked everyone, "Have any of you heard of the Dark Alliance?" "Dark Alliance?" Chapter 16:37. Even famous Sword Dao Shua, who had always been well-informed, had no impression of the guild mentioned by Wuji. This time, Wuji was even more puzzled. To move unhindered was a big guild. Even a novice player in the game would have heard of it. To move unhindered and stab others in the back. To move unhindered mines at this time, it had to be at least a top guild. However, this guild was unknown, which was really strange. Could it be that there was some kind of force behind this guild? Of course, it would be nonsense to say that it was a top family or a military force. This was documentary literature, so there was definitely no such nonsense. Most of the conflicts in the game were between guilds. The cause of the conflict was also very simple: stealing monsters, land, and equipment. If it got out of hand, it would at most escalate to a conflict between studios. As for the so-called big families and forces, it was completely wishful thinking. What was a big family and force? If they had so much free time, wouldn't it be more direct for them to directly find trouble with Longton Company? How would they have the mood to come to the game to compete with a group of small studios for benefits? Wouldn't that be degrading themselves? Not to mention those big families and forces, even the sponsors behind the major professional teams would not be so low as to compete with studios for business. Therefore, no matter how big the force behind Dark Alliance was, at best, it was a big studio. Xuanjin had also come into contact with studios, among which Wuji had a better impression of Xiaobing Studio. However, although Xiaobing Studio was also very large, and after Xiaobing Studio was taken over by evildoers Run Wild, Xiaobing Studio had taken over most of their channels. To move unhindered was like hitting a rock with an egg. Otherwise, they would not have lost so badly in the beginning. Moreover, it was said that after Xiaobing Studio was kicked out of Rebirth, they had already shifted their business to other games. They had no time to spare, so it was unlikely that they would suddenly appear and go against reigning the world. To move unhindered, Wuji really couldn't think of any other studio that had the ability or motive to provoke them. Just as Wuji was thinking hard about the background of the Dark Alliance, Wang Yu rubbed his chin and said, "Could it be some studio or something? Aren't these bastards very low profile?" Profit was the only thing that workshops pursued. As the biggest beneficiary of the game, it was only natural that reigning the world would be targeted. Both Musician and Wang Yu had been cheated by the studio. Wang Yu had never had a good impression of this kind of group, so when talking about the studio, Wang Yu had some emotions. "Don't be silly." Hearing Wang Yu's words, Mingji and Daoxue couldn't help but mock. "One look and I can tell that you're an outsider." From what I know, other than Old Demon, the studios in our country are all small fries. To move unhindered, the established studios know that they won't be able to make much money, so they've long changed games. To move unhindered is just a motley crew. Although Wang Yu knew that he couldn't compare to Mingji and Daoxue in this aspect, out of his pride as a Chuanjin contrarian, Wang Yu still curled his lips and retorted, "What do you know? Are there only Chinese studios in this game?" Hearing Wang Yu's words, Mingji and Daoxue was speechless. Studios are also saturated. Those overseas studios can't even finish making money in their own territory, so why would they come all the way to our country's server to pick a fight? I'll lose if I argue with an outsider like you. That's hard to say. If they can't make money, they'll come here to earn some extra income. Wang Yu continued to be stubborn. As the saying goes, the speaker didn't mean it, but the listener did. Wang Yu was indeed an outsider. Although what he said was reasonable, it was all layman's words. When others heard what Wang Yu said, they would at most think that he was a noob. However, when Wuji heard Wang Yu and Mingji and Daoxue, he seemed to have thought of something and asked Mingji and Daoxue, "To move unhindered, are there any overseas studios that are similar in scale?" "Damn, Wuji, you're not a noob. Don't tell me you took Old Cow's words seriously." Mingji and Daoxue was shocked by Wuji's question. It was just as Mingji and Daoxue had said, the competition between studios was not that great. They were all in charge of their own territories, and they could not even earn enough money from their own territories. Who would spend so much effort to look for work in other places? Time was money. If they had the time, they might as well sell more things. Cut the crap. Just tell me if there are any. Wuji waved his hand and interrupted Mingji and Daoxue, then asked seriously. "Well," Mingji and Daoxue thought for a moment and said, "There aren't any that are as big as Old Demon, but there are some that are slightly worse." "Oh, tell me, what are the names of these studios?" Wuji asked. "There aren't many studios of this scale." Mingji and Daoxue said, "I only know of 3. One is the European server's Royal Honor, the other is the American server's Freemasonry, and the last is the Japanese server's Black Dragon Society." "But this Black Dragon Society isn't really a studio right now, at most a larger guild." "Yes, it's him." Before Mingji and Daoxue could finish speaking, Wuji suddenly interrupted. "This Black Dragon Society should be the so-called Dark Alliance." "Black Dragon Society?" Everyone was stunned when they heard that. "How can you be so sure? There are countless studios in the world. Furthermore, this matter might not be the work of a studio." The fact that Wuji was so certain of pushing the blame to the Black Dragon Society was really confusing. Wuji laughed and said, "It's so obvious. Can't you guys tell?" It had to be said that Wuji didn't differentiate between friend and foe when he mocked. This bastard's face was filled with disdain for everyone's intelligence. "Look at your sister. How is it obvious?" Facing the pretentious Wuji, everyone gave him the middle finger. It was obvious that not only did their reaction not scare Wuji, but it was also what he wanted. This guy liked to see people like this. Only when he saw Wang Yu roll up his sleeves did Wuji retract his annoying smile and say, "Actually, there are 3 reasons." "Oh, which 3? Wang Yu tilted his ear and asked. 1. The Black Dragon Society is not small. Wuji said. "Nonsense. The Black Dragon Society isn't the only guild of this scale." Mingdu shouted. "You shut up." Wuji glared at Mingdu and said, 2. To move unhindered and develop a mind that the Black Dragon Society can't develop. From a certain point of view, the Black Dragon Society has a motive. This, Evildoers Run Wild, was a little embarrassed. According to what you said, there are countless guilds with motives. Chapter 1638. Oh, what's the 3rd point? Hearing Wuji's words, old Wang, who was not interested in Wuji keeping them in suspense, could not help but be curious. "Resources," Wuji said calmly. "Resources? What do you mean?" Not only old Wang, but the rest of Chuanjin were also confused. What the F***CK was this? They were not even close to each other. Wuji laughed and said, "Don't forget, not every server is as vast as the country server." Everyone was stunned again. Indeed, the map in Rebirth roughly corresponded to the world map. China was a country with vast territory and abundant resources. It had 300 main cities in the game, while the servers of those smaller countries only had a few main cities. The Korean server was slightly better. Although their territory was small, they had few players. However, it was different for Japan. Although their territory was not much bigger than the Korean server, their player base was much higher. Especially after Rebirth's global data was combined. After the Japanese server and the national server were connected, the Japanese server's players suddenly started pouring in. The Japanese server, which originally had a few 100,000 players, now had millions of players. In addition, the original 3 islands and 6 cities were taken by Chuanjin and the Blood Alliance. On average, the other main cities had almost 1 million players each. Such a player density could only be described as terrifying. One had to know that even the largest main city in the national server, Holy Light City, only had 1 million players. Main cities like Yuhuicheng only had 400 to 500,000 players. Those normal main cities actually only had around 300,000 players. 300,000 people did not sound like a lot, but 300,000 people entering the city at the same time could fill up a main city like Yuhuicheng's. Even walking would be a problem. As for over 1 million people squeezing into an island, the conditions were harsh and the lack of resources was imaginable. If the local players found it too crowded, they could go to the wilderness. Would the Japanese players have to soak in the sea? The Black Dragon Guild controls the 4 main cities of Yingzhou Island. Isn't the allocation of resources up to them? Mingjian Daoxue curled his lips and questioned. It's true that the Black Dragon Society has the final say, but they have to have it too. Wuji smiled and said, "To move unhindered, don't forget that the largest mining area in the Japanese server is in their hands. What other resources could they possibly have?" With Wuji's words, everyone finally understood what was going on. They were all veterans in the game, so they knew a lot about the game. Ordinary players played games to kill time, but the majority of players who played guilds did so to earn money. The larger a guild was, the more impure its motives would be. As for the players who had been tricked into joining the guild, they could either become one of their own and make a fortune together, or they could become the guild's free laborers. Every month, the guild would give them some rewards to make them happy. The Black Dragon Society had hundreds of thousands of players, and their influence spread across the 4 main cities of the Japanese server. If someone said that such a guild was here to play games to pass the time, even they would not believe it. It was obvious that such a guild was here to make money. Nowadays, there were more and more players in the Japanese server, and their consumption of resources was increasing. Other than in dungeons, there was no spacious space in the mountains. It was difficult to fight monsters, so naturally, the supply of resources could not meet the demand. To move unhindered, the largest resource production area in the Japanese server had been occupied. Not only did the Black Dragon Society not get any leftovers, they didn't even have enough for themselves. The Black Dragon Society was still hoping to make a fortune from the resources, but now they had to lose money to move unhindered territory for the sake of profits. As for the big guilds and other servers, they did not have enough resources to mine, so of course they would not come all the way to the local server to cause trouble. To move unhindered among all the guilds in the game that had the conditions and the ability to do so, the Black Dragon Society was the only guild that met all the conditions. It was no wonder that Wuji was so determined to be the Black Dragon Society's doing after hearing the name of the Black Dragon Society. And this dark alliance was most likely established by Black Dragon Society players. F***CK, these bastards. Why are there no movements from hundreds of thousands of players coming to the local server? Thinking of this, Ming Jian Daoxue could not help but feel a chill in his heart. Who told you that they have hundreds of thousands of players coming? Wuji raised his eyebrows. Nonsense. Otherwise, would they dare to stab me in the back? Ming Jian Daoxue said confidently. Tisk. Wuji heard this and said disdainfully, "You call yourself a businessman. It seems like you lack a certain understanding of studio players." Being looked down upon by Wuji, Ming Jian Daoxue's mind was instantly filled with question marks. He said unhappily, "What opinion?" At this moment, Evildoers Run Wild explained from the side, "Studio players only have money and benefits in their eyes. They don't care who is the boss. They only care about who can give them food." What do you mean? Ming Jian Daoxue could not react for a moment. It means that whoever has the mines will have millions of followers. Evildoers Run Wild said, "See that? This is the real boss. Little Snow, you're still lacking. Learn from your wife." Wuji once again mocked Ming Jian Daoxue mercilessly. "Don't you have some contract in your hands?" Wang Yu asked in confusion. "Are these not useful?" "They're useful," Evildoers Run Wild said helplessly. "My subordinates all look at benefits. If the mines are in my hands, they will naturally take the contract seriously because of the penalty fee. If the mines are not in my hands compared to a stable income, the penalty fee is nothing." F***CK. How can you be so realistic? When he heard Evildoers Run Wild's words, Wang Yu was flabbergasted. "Look at these followers of yours. Look at this group of scum from Chuanjin. Although none of them are good, they're very loyal sometimes. I have no choice." Evildoers Run Wild said helplessly, "We're not the same kind of people. Everyone follows me to make a living. Now that I can't give them food, it's natural for them to leave. There's no such thing as being realistic. It's all for the sake of living. You've grown up." Wang Yu patted Evildoers Run Wild's shoulder and felt extremely emotional. He never thought that the little brat from back then could say such mature words. However, the Chuanjin dogs were rather dissatisfied with Wang Yu's wording. They opened their mouths and retorted, "You're the scum. Your whole family is scum." Whoosh! When he heard what the Chuanjin dog said, Lao Wang casually pulled out his sword and stared at them calmly. "I'll give you one more chance. Who are you calling scum?" Chapter 1639. Big Bro Wuji, it's all thanks to you this time. I'll reward you handsomely after this. Evildoers Run Wild tugged on Wuji's hand when he saw that Wuji was able to analyze the opponent with just a few words. He was so excited that he didn't know what to do. As the saying goes, know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. Although the monstrous genius Hung Xing was strong, and although the world was big, if he didn't know who his opponent was, he would still be at a loss. He would have strength, but nowhere to use it. By the time he found out who his opponent was, his opponent's strength would already be above his own. Now that Wuji had analyzed the target's information, Evildoer Rampage was no longer in a passive position. Instead, he started to gain the initiative. The battlefield was ever-changing, and only those who could take the initiative would be able to control the entire battlefield. Evildoers Run Wild was very clear about Chuanjin style. This group of people would not do anything without benefits. Not only did they rescue Evildoers Run Wild from the encirclement, but they also helped Evildoers Run Wild greatly. It was only reasonable for evildoers run wild to express his gratitude. You're treating me like an outsider. Unexpectedly, Wu Ji, who had never had enough of taking advantage of others, waved his hand and said, "Don't forget, our Chuanjin sect is also sponsored by you. So in a sense, we are also your trusted aides and subordinates. Helping you solve your problems is also part of our duty. If you want to thank someone, thank your brother." TSK. What does it have to do with me? Wang Yu heard this and pouted indifferently. Although Wang Yu expressed that it had nothing to do with him, evildoers run wild understood very well. Who in the game didn't know what kind of people the Quanjin sect was? If it wasn't for Wang Yu's loyalty, these arrogant and unruly fellows wouldn't have helped her for nothing. At this moment, they might even be among the guilds fighting for territory. Of course, words of thanks between brothers would be considered as an outsider. Evildoers run wild looked meaningfully at Wang Yu and said, "All right, now that things have come to this, I'm going to clean up the mess. My good brothers, let's part ways here." As he said this, evildoers run wild cupped his fist at Chuanjin. It wasn't hard to see that evildoers run wild was also a proud person. With such a big thing happening to his own guild, evildoers run wild was also embarrassed. Evildoers Run Wild was already very apologetic when they were rescued by Chuanjin. At this time, whether it was in terms of face or friendship, Evildoers Run Wild was too embarrassed to trouble Chuanjin. After all, cleaning up the guild was within Evildoers Run Wild's responsibility. To move unhindered so many brothers, Evildoers Run Wild had to ask for help to clean up a few foreign players. Wuji's EQ was very high. Why else would someone like him take the initiative to say that he was sponsored by someone else? It was because he wanted to take care of Evildoers Run Wild's face. As he said this, Evildoers Run Wild extended his wings and was about to take off. At this moment, Wuji reached out to grab Evildoers Run Wild and asked, "You think go like this? Do you know where they are? We can check." To move unhindered, we have a few brothers who have maxed out clairvoyance. Evildoers Run Wild said, "Don't talk nonsense." Wuji laughed coldly. "Do you believe that you can't order any of your brothers around?" Evildoers Run Wild was speechless when he heard this. That was true. The Dark Alliance was buying up mines, and the other guilds weren't as close to Chuanjin as the Blood Alliance. Although they weren't willing, they naturally wouldn't hesitate to sell this hot potato. To move unhindered was better than being targeted. However, no one knew what the people from reigning the world were thinking. Seeing the Dark Alliance pocketing the mines one by one, the players from reigning the world also realized that it was time for a change of boss at this time. Other than those trusted subordinates of the Evildoer Rampant, no one else would stand together with the Evildoer Rampant. They didn't even know who the boss was yet they had already closed their eyes and interfered. Do they still want their jobs? You have to be calm at all times. Wuji said calmly. Without the mines in your hands, who would listen to you? Are you going to spend money to buy back what belongs to you? The words that Evildoers Run Wild was about to say were once again stuffed back into his throat by Wuji. The mines were now in the hands of the big guilds. To move unhindered territory, but the territory in the game belonged to the one with the biggest fist. The leaders of the big guilds were all shrewd. They definitely wouldn't return the land that they had spent so much effort to snatch for no reason. Therefore, if Evildoers Run Wild wanted to go against the Dark Alliance, the only way was to buy the mines like the Dark Alliance. But Wuji's words immediately dispelled Evildoers Run Wild's thoughts. In Evildoers Run Wild's heart, the mines were originally his. It was just that they were snatched away. Spending money to buy back what belonged to him wasn't appropriate no matter how he thought about it. Then what should we do? Evildoers Run Wild thought for a moment and asked Wuji, to move unhindered mines and our brothers are taken away by others, right? Huh. Wuji laughed out loud and said, "Taken away by others? There's no such thing. The Dark Alliance is only paying for their actions. I will make them spit out all the mines." Really? Hearing that they could take back all the mines without spending money, Evildoers Run Wild's eyes lit up. Then what should we do now? Let the bullets fly for a while. Wuji said confidently, "There's no hurry to wait for them to take over all the mines. Once they take over all the mines, they will have a lot of power. Evildoers Run Wild was a little surprised when he heard that. We might not be able to take care of them by then. Don't worry, Wuji said calmly. There will always be a way out. Someone will come and help us when the time comes. All right. Although Evildoers Run Wild was feeling very uncertain, he knew Wuji's abilities. Now that Wuji had said so, he must have his plans. Evildoers Run Wild hesitated for a moment, but finally decided to listen to Wuji. After all, if Wuji could not do it with his intelligence, he would definitely not be able to do it either. Just as Wuji had expected, the Dark Alliance was actually the Black Dragon faction, and the mastermind was the boss of the Black Dragon faction, the Black Dragon King. Thinking about it, it made sense to be able to bring a few hundred people across the sea to cause trouble in the country, and to use such underhanded methods to trick the largest guild in the country. To move unhindered, an average person would not have the guts and brains to do so. Just as the people of Quanjun were guessing who their opponent was, the players of the Dark Alliance had already started their acquisition work. The reason why only a few hundred people from the Black Dragon faction had come was not only because they were afraid of publicity, but also because there were only a few hundred people in the Black Dragon faction who understood Chinese and could communicate normally. Chapter 1640. In just a few hours, the players of the Dark Alliance had negotiated the purchase of most of the mines and started to recruit miners. The skill of mining ores had been a very profitable path since the beginning of online games. Anyone who had played games before would know the logic of mining ores to get rich. Even a noob like Wang Yu knew the importance of ores to players. Otherwise, Evildoers Run Wild would not have been able to develop his guild into a large organization with millions of players in less than a year. However, in a game like Rebirth, all the mining areas have been firmly occupied by reigning the world ever since the game's launch. It would be difficult for anyone who is not a reigning the world player to mine. Because of this, most players had a strong desire to mine. The Huaxia service area had a lot of people. With a population of over 100 million players, it was hard to find a toad with 3 legs, but it was easy to find a miner with 2 legs. Just as the internal strife within reigning the world was spreading like wildfire, a Dark Alliance suddenly popped up to recruit miners. Any player with a brain would know what was going on. To move unhindered was about to become a thing of the past. The major powers in the game were about to be reshuffled, and the strongest would naturally be the Dark Alliance who had the rights to the mines in the game. As such, it was not just the players who wanted to earn money from mining. Even the players from the major guilds could not help but develop a sense of opportunism. After all, the moral restraints of the real world did not have much of an effect on the game world. It was common for a bird to choose a tree to nest in. It was not strange for players to follow whichever guild was bigger. But what was strange was that the most enthusiastic players were actually the players who had to move unhindered. These guys were all very cunning. When the sovereign descends on the world betrayed them, this bunch of bastards had been watching from the side. Now that they heard that the mines in Evildoers Run Wild's hands had all been taken by the Dark Alliance, they naturally knew what to do. Actually, it made sense. Evildoers Run Wild had also said that the brothers under him were just trying to make ends meet. Their motive for playing the game was to earn money. Their feelings for the guild were far less than their true interests. Or feelings. Could they make ends meet? Work was the most important thing. Families would starve if they talked about feelings, so there was no need to force others to be absolutely loyal. Since they could not earn money by following Evildoers Run Wild, they naturally had to find another place to earn money. There were many players trying their best to join the Dark Alliance. If they hesitated, they would lose their jobs. Just as the Dark Alliance announced that they were recruiting miners, the system notifications rang in Evildoers Run Wild's ears. Player XXX has quit. To move unhindered from XXX City, XXX Guild has left the Dark Alliance. To move unhindered. Evildoers Run Wild was usually an optimistic person, and his mental fortitude was not weak. But looking at the string of news, Evildoers Run Wild's face was ashen, his eyes like a pool of stagnant water. It was not hard to see how much of a blow this matter had dealt to Evildoers Run Wild. No one in Xuanzhen mocked evildoers run wild's pathetic state. Instead, they expressed extreme sympathy for evildoers run wild. When he woke up in the morning, he was still the boss of over 1 million players. But in less than a day, he had lost everything. He had become a general without an army. He had experienced such a huge rise and fall in a single day. If it was someone with a weaker mental fortitude, they would probably want to die from such a blow. To move unhindered, most of these players left without saying goodbye. Those who were slightly more sensible might even know to say goodbye to evildoers run wild before they left. Evildoers run wild was a person who cared about his reputation. No matter how devastated he was, he had to pretend that nothing had happened and bid farewell to his brothers who had said goodbye to him. Brother, take care. To move unhindered, there will always be a place for you. Although that was the case, who would want such a position? Due to the breach of contract, every player who left the guild would have to pay a penalty fee to evildoers run wild. But looking at the number of gold coins in his wallet, evildoers run wild could not bring himself to be happy at all. This was probably the most difficult time for evildoers run wild to collect money. The Dark Dragon King was also very intelligent. He understood the principle of the rise and fall of the other. Furthermore, the players of Reigning the World were all experienced miners and were very familiar with the mining area. Therefore, the Dark Alliance made an exception for the veteran players of Reigning the World and did not even have to pay a membership fee. From a certain point of view, Reigning the World could be said to have been swallowed by the Dark Alliance. Furthermore, it was swallowed in one gulp without any effort. The Dark Dragon King was indeed a cunning old fox. It was indeed terrifying. It was not an injustice for evildoers run wild to lose to the Dark Dragon King. Evildoers run wild was so young. It was already beyond the Dark Dragon King's expectations that he was not killed in the first round. Dark Moon City. In the office of the Dark Alliance's headquarters, the Dark Dragon King sat on a chair and listened to his subordinates report lazily. His expression was extremely calm, and no one could tell if he was happy or angry. To move unhindered miners have been arranged? After listening to his subordinate's report, the Dark Dragon King nodded and asked calmly. "It has been arranged," the subordinate said respectfully. "Not bad." The Dark Dragon King looked at his subordinate approvingly. He then asked, "What about the mining area?" The subordinate said, "There are a few others who seem to be waiting for a price increase. They haven't come to an agreement yet." "Oh, price increase?" "They're overthinking." The Dark Dragon King said calmly, "Tell everyone to continue negotiating. If they really can't come to an agreement, then forget it. We have quite a lot of manpower. We could just rob them. After all, they were the ones who robbed the mining area." "Understood." The subordinate bowed deeply and said, "I will pass the message down now. Are you there?" In Yu Huicheng, Blood Red War Flag once again received news from Absent Sunday. Without waiting for Blood Red War Flag's response, Absent Sun directly said, "Guild Leader Blood Red, have you thought about the mining area?" There are still people who want to die." Blood Red War Flag coldly snorted after seeing the message, then replied, "Is it that urgent? I haven't thought about it." "Huh?" Absent Sun said, "Haven't thought about it? Guild Leader Blood Red is waiting for the price increase, right?" "Huh?" Blood Red War Flag pretended to be embarrassed and laughed. "You can even tell." Absent Sun coldly snorted. "Aren't you Chinese all like this? A fixed price of 500,000. Are you selling? The price is not negotiable?" Blood Red War Flag asked again. "Negotiate? You are thinking too much." Chapter 1641. F***CK. Seeing Absent Sun's message, Blood Red War Flag's lungs were about to explode. What was arrogance? What was arrogance? Blood Red War Flag had played the game for so many years, but this was the first time he had met someone who dared to speak to him like this, other than Xuanzhen. "I'm not negotiating with you. I'm just informing you." Damn it, Blood Red War Flag had tens of thousands of subordinates. If not for Wuji's warning, Blood Red War Flag would have retorted on the spot. Actually, there was no point in retaliating. The current scale of the Dark Alliance was no longer the same as it was in the beginning. Now that the Dark Alliance had swallowed up reigning the world, they were naturally the new overlord of the national server. Absent Sun's unyielding attitude was also due to his confidence. All right, Blood-Red War Flag gritted its teeth for a full half a minute before swallowing its anger and replied, 500,000 it is, but how should we trade? Simple, Absent Sun said. Withdraw your people from the mining area. Our guild's players will arrive soon and send you the money after they take over. That's right. Even though the mines in the 300 main cities of the Bravehearts continent had changed their names and became the property of the Dark Alliance, they were still the same people who were mining the mines. As long as they gave an order, the players in Yuhui City, who had originally dominated the world, would be able to start working. That's not appropriate. Blood-Red War Flag thought for a moment. What if you don't give me the money after I withdraw my troops? Don't worry. We're the most trustworthy. As long as you withdraw your troops and let my people take over, you will receive the money. Absent Sun said stubbornly. How much is trustworthiness worth these days? Blood-Red War Flag said seriously. I have always been more cautious when doing things. 500,000 is not a small amount. I think it's better to be more formal. Then what do you think we should do? Absent Sun said impatiently. Deal face to face. Hand over the money and withdraw your troops. Blood-Red War Flag casually replied with the lines they had prepared beforehand. This, Absent Sun thought for a moment. No problem. Send the coordinates. All right. Blood-Red War Flag smiled and sent the coordinates of Yu Huiqing Tavern to Absent Sunday. In fact, it was not just Absent Sunday. All of the players in the Dark Alliance were more averse to trading face-to-face. After all, they knew that they had more money than they had in the beginning, even if others did not know about it. If they were cheated by some daring person, they would not be able to reason with them. But it was different now. To move unhindered, the current scale of the Dark Alliance was even greater than when they had first to move unhindered. With this kind of strength as a backing, Total Darkness could not help but feel a little arrogant. He naturally had more confidence in his words and actions. Wasn't it just a face-to-face transaction? A mere blood alliance wouldn't dare to pull any tricks. Do you believe that they wouldn't be wiped out just by raising their hands? After discussing the location of the transaction, Blood-Red War Flag had a smirk on its face. It then sent an okay emoticon to Wuji and said, Done. Thanks for the trouble. Seeing Blood-Red War Flag's message, Wuji replied politely, then closed the conversation window and said, Let's go. Leave? Where are we going? Everyone was confused. To Yu Huicheng, of course. Wuji smiled and said, We've waited for so long, it's time for us to get to work. As he spoke, Wuji took out a pile of scrolls and handed them to everyone. Damn, how do you have so many teleportation scrolls? Seeing the scrolls in Wuji's hands, everyone could not help but be shocked. It was fine if he only brought one of these scrolls normally, but Wuji had brought 4 when he came. Now, he had brought out a pile of scrolls. How many did this guy buy? Wuji said calmly, When I teleported to the city of Nephas, I saw that there were so many people in the city of Nephas, so I bought all the teleportation scrolls in the auction house. Awesome. Hearing this, everyone gave him a thumbs up, as expected of a ruthless character who cheated people all year round. He understood the principle of being prepared. Seeing that there were so many enemies, he had already prepared a way out for himself. A true expert was someone who could advance and retreat at the same time. After sighing in admiration, everyone tore open the teleportation scrolls and stepped through the teleportation gate. Everyone once again returned to the familiar land of Yu Huicheng. Purchasing the mining area was an urgent matter. Absent Sun was not short of money, and of course, he did not lack a teleportation scroll. At almost the same time, Absent Sun and Xuanzhen's group arrived at the Yu Huicheng Tavern. Inside the tavern, Blood-Red War Flag had been waiting for a long time. The players of Yu Huicheng all knew that Wang Yu and Evildoers Run Wild had an ambiguous relationship. Today, Blood-Red Alliance had snatched away Evildoers Run Wild's territory. At this time, seeing Xuanzhen's group and Blood-Red War Flag appear in the tavern at the same time, everyone was shocked and left their seats. What a joke. These two guilds were the strongest existences in Yuhuicheng. The last player who came here to watch the show had his guild wiped out. With the previous example, everyone naturally would not be so blind. When Blood Red War Flag saw Absent Sun and Xuanzhen's group enter, they shouted and called out, "Come, come, come, over here." Seeing this, Xuanzhen's group sat down without saying a word. Wang Yu, Wu Ji, and Evildoers Run Wild sat at Blood Red War Flag's table. The others sat not far away, blocking the way out of the tavern. When Absent Sun saw Wang Yu's group sit down without a word, a trace of displeasure flashed across his face. However, he quickly adjusted his mood and asked, "Blood Red War Flag?" "That's me," Blood Red War Flag replied. "You must be Absent Sunday, yes." Absent Sun glanced at Wang Yu's group of three and asked straightforwardly, "We are making a deal. Why are these three sitting here?" "Huh." Before Blood Red War Flag could reply, Wu Ji laughed out loud and said, "Our guild also wants to buy Boss Blood Red's mine. What a coincidence that we ran into each other." Absent Sun's expression changed. "Blood Red War Flag, what do you mean by this? Do you think you can get us to increase the price just like that? How can you speak like that?" Wu Ji laughed. "Since we are here to buy the mining area, of course it goes to the highest bidder. If you are poor, don't try to be rich." "Oomph. Did I say that to you?" Hearing Wu Ji's words, Absent Sun's expression suddenly darkened. "Blood Red War Flag, I have already told you. I am informing you now, not bargaining. I have no choice." Blood Red War Flag spread its hands helplessly. "They want to buy, and I can't afford to offend them." "Oh." Hearing Blood Red War Flag say this, Absent Sun could not help but look up and down at Wang Yu's group. Then he sneered and asked, "Which guild are you from? How dare you steal my business? Do you know who I am?" Chapter 1642. Oh, hearing Absent Sun's words, Blood Red War Flag could not help but mourn for him for half a minute. Blood Red War Flag knew better than anyone what kind of people Xuanzhen was. This group of people had always been bold, and they were amenable to coaxing but not coercion. If they spoke nicely, they might give you a good attitude, but with such an arrogant attitude, wasn't that asking for death? In the end, he was still a youngster, not knowing his limits. Blood Red War Flag had asked Xuanzhen the same question back then. However, what surprised Blood Red War Flag was that in the face of Absent Sun's provocation, Wang Yu and the others did not look angry at all. Moreover, Wu Ji, who had always been unforgiving with his words, did not retort on the spot. Instead, he looked at Absent Sun and said with a smile, "We are a small guild, not worth mentioning. May I know which guild you belong to? Why are you speaking so arrogantly?" Oomph. Absent Sun was also honest. When Wu Ji said that his guild was not worth mentioning, this kid really believed it. He then looked at Wu Ji with disdain and said, "Dark Alliance. Have you heard of them? Sounds familiar. I think I've heard of them somewhere before." Wu Ji rubbed his chin, his eyes looking up, looking as if he was thinking. At this time, Blood Red War Flag hurriedly came over and introduced, "It's the guild I just told you about, the one that swallowed up to move unhindered in one fell swoop. It can now be said to be the strongest guild in the entire server." Hee hee. Seeing Blood Red War Flag introduce their guild like this, Absent Sun was quite satisfied, nodding his head in satisfaction and even revealing a proud smile on his face. Hiss! Hearing Blood Red War Flag's words, Wu Ji suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air exaggeratedly. He looked at Absent Sun with a surprised expression and asked, "Is that the Dark Alliance that is purchasing mining areas?" Seeing Wu Ji's surprised look, Blood Red War Flag's forehead was full of black lines, secretly cursing, "Damn, it was clearly you who lured him here, and yet you look so surprised. It's a waste of talent not to become an actor." "That's right. It's our guild." Wu Ji's exaggerated expression once again made Absent Sun feel refreshed, and he very decisively revealed his identity. "Then how much are you offering?" Just as Absent Sun finished speaking, Wu Ji came over and asked. Wu Ji's question directly caused Absent Sun to stare blankly. However, Wuji's performance just now had left a good impression on Absent Sun, so he no longer put on a straight face and calmly said, 500,000. 500,000? Wuji pretended to be surprised. Is it that cheap? Of course. Absent Sun had a smug look on his face. Then how about I give you 1,000,000 for the mine? Wuji turned and asked blood-red war flag. As he spoke, Wuji waved his hand and took out a large jewelry box. With a plop, he threw it on the table. The jeweled box glittered with golden light, radiating light in all directions, directly shocking Absent Sunday. In the setting of rebirth, when gold coins exceeded 1,000,000, the container would become a gorgeous jewel box. There was no other reason than to highlight the nobility and make the tycoon look more impressive. 1,000,000 gold coins was not a small amount, and the number of players in the game who could casually take out 1,000,000 gold coins could be counted on one hand. Even the Dark Alliance purchased the mine with a loan from the system. As for ordinary players, they had never even seen so much money. After all, most players only played the game as a sideline, barely enough to support their families. And if the gold coins on the table were converted to RMB, that would be 10,000,000. Not to mention supporting a family. Even Uncle Nyo would be rich. This, looking at the treasure box on the table, blood-red war flag had a troubled expression. At the side, Absent Sun said anxiously, "Why are you so insensible?" "Oh." Wuji raised his eyebrows and said, "This mine belongs to whoever has the money. I don't have anything else, but I have money. Right now, my price is double yours. How about it, blood-red war flag? Don't you think you should sell this mine to me?" At this point, Wuji turned his head and asked blood-red war flag, "This is not a matter of money." Blood-red war flag waved his hands in embarrassment, not knowing what to do. Absent Sun could not help but say, "This is a matter of the guild." "A matter of the guild?" Wuji muttered doubtfully, then took out 2 more treasure boxes and threw them on the table. He then asked blood-red war flag, "Is this enough this time?" This blood-red war flag saw the treasure boxes on the table, licked his lips, turned his head, and looked at Absent Sun. "Brother Dark, what do you think?" I think Absent Sun was also speechless. He could see that the guy in front of him was a hothead. He did not have anything, but he did not lack money. If Wuji had not taken out so much money, Absent Sun would definitely have threatened him again. But seeing Wuji casually take out 3 treasure boxes, Absent Sun felt a little guilty. This was a tycoon. Why did the Dark Alliance come all the way here to buy mine? Wasn't it to make money? Therefore, anyone could be offended except the rich. As the saying goes, money is the best weapon. Just a moment ago, he was insufferably arrogant, but now he was stuttering a little. What a joke. If he really offended such a tycoon, how would he survive in the future? After being stunned for a long time, Absent Sun slowly came to his senses. After thinking for a moment, he asked respectfully, "Friend, I know you are very rich, but this is not how you should spend your money. Is that so?" Wuji asked curiously. "Then how do you say I should spend it?" "It's very simple," Absent Sun said. "You can cooperate with the Dark Alliance." "Why?" Wuji had a look of reluctance. Absent Sun said proudly, "Just because we, the Dark Alliance, can buy the mine for 500,000, while you have to use 3,000,000. "Oh." Hearing Absent Sun say this, Wuji thought for a moment and said, "What you said seems to make some sense, but what benefits do I get?" "Of course there are benefits." Absent Sun continued to bluff. "Managing the mine is not a carefree job. We, the Dark Alliance, also do business. As long as you are willing to invest, we can give you shares. When the time comes, you don't have to worry about anything. You just have to count the money." Saying this, Absent Sun gave himself a thumbs up for his eloquence. Although the Black Dragon Triad was not a small guild, everyone knew that the Wei Nation was a small country with few people. Their resources were also forcibly occupied. Under such circumstances, the Black Dragon Triad did not have any surplus food. Otherwise, they would not have taken such a big risk to snatch the mine. Chapter 1643. It was obvious that the person standing in front of Absent Sun was a rich man and a foolish one with a lot of money. More importantly, The person in front of him wanted to do business in the mining area. Even though the Dark Alliance was buying the mining areas at a low price, there were too many of them. 300 mining areas at 500,000 each was an astronomical sum. If he could trick this person into paying for the mining area, wouldn't he be left with a sum of money? That way, Absent Sun would be able to hold his head high in front of the Dark Dragon King. It would not be impossible for him to reach the pinnacle of his life. As for the shares, screw it. When the time comes, as long as the money was paid, the Dark Alliance would be able to decide how many shares to give. With just a few of them, would they dare to challenge the millions of people in the Dark Alliance? Do you think I'm a fool? Who knew that just as Absent Sun's little abacus was rattling in his mind, Wuji's words were like a bucket of cold water poured over Absent Sun's head. But without waiting for Absent Sun to explain, Wuji continued, "Look at how ignorant you are. I reckon you're just a small fry. You have the final say on the shares." Phew! Hearing Wuji's words, Absent Sun's originally cold mood once again recovered. He did not even care about Wuji's open and veiled mockery of him. He hurriedly said, "I don't have the final say, but our boss does. The fish has taken a bait." Everyone in Xuanzhen was shocked by Absent Sun's words. The blood-red war flag also subconsciously rubbed its nose. As expected of Wuji, he had a thorough understanding of people's psychology. With just a few words, he was able to make Absent Sun fall into his trap. As the saying goes, shoot the horse before shooting the man. Capture the leader before capturing the bandits. To move unhindered, evildoers run wild naturally knew that this matter had little to do with his subordinates. The main culprit was the boss of the Dark Alliance. Rather than mustering a large force to snatch the mining area, the simplest and most direct method would be to find the boss behind the scenes of the Dark Alliance. To move unhindered and return to the hands of evildoers run wild, as long as he could snatch everyone's contract from the hands of this boss. The reason why Wuji had lured Absent Sun here, and then frantically flaunted his wealth, was so that this lad could bring him to the leader of the Dark Alliance. Sure enough, this silly road deer was easily tricked by Wuji, and what was even funnier was that this fellow even thought that he had successfully tricked Wuji. "Your boss? Where is he? Tell him to come see me." Wuji looked around and said impatiently, "Wait for a moment. I'll contact our boss right now." When Absent Sun heard this, he excitedly opened his friend's list. After finding the Black Dragon King, he sent a message, "Boss, I have good news." From his words, it was not difficult to see how excited Absent Sun was right now. "Good news." Very quickly, the Black Dragon King replied in a very calm tone, "Tell me, what is the good news?" "I met a rich man from the country of Huaxia. He is also purchasing mining areas." Absent Sun said, "Snatching territory with us. What kind of good news is that?" The Black Dragon King did not understand. "No, it's not like that." Absent Sun hurriedly explained, "Just now, under my persuasion, he intends to cooperate with our Dark Alliance." "Cooperate with us? How do we cooperate?" The Black Dragon King's tone was still calm, not at all agitated by Absent Sun's words. "That is, he will pay, and we will give him shares and so on and so forth." Absent Sun was very pleased with himself as he sent the set of words he had used to trick Wuji to the Black Dragon King. Absent Sun had originally thought that the Black Dragon King would be gratified by his wisdom, but the Black Dragon King's reply was still as indifferent as before. "Be careful when you do things. There are swindlers everywhere these days." "Have you asked his name?" This Absent Sun froze for a moment and asked Wuji, "May I know your esteemed name? Trying to get my personal information. Do you want to kill me?" Wuji sneered. "No, I don't mean that." Absent Sun said, "I'm just asking. I know you wouldn't dare." Wuji curled his lips. "My name is Wuji." Saying this, he also sent a friend request to Absent Sunday. He said his name is Wuji. After confirming that there was no mistake, Absent Sun casually sent Wuji's name card over. "Wuji." The Black Dragon King looked at Wuji's name card and hesitated for a long time before saying, "This should be a nameless person, taking this opportunity to deliberately show off in front of you. Although Chuanjin's group had caused the Black Dragon Gang to lose chicken feathers and duck blood, and even lost 2 main cities, the Black Dragon King actually didn't know who had caused him to suffer so miserably. After all, there was a language barrier, and Wuji wasn't in the mood to introduce himself to this old thing, so it was reasonable that the Black Dragon King hadn't heard of Wuji's name. However, the Black Dragon King was an old fox after all, casually guessing that Wuji's purpose was to deliberately get close to Absent Sunday deliberately. Absent Sun saw the message and couldn't help but quiver, hurriedly replying, "Is there a trap?" "There shouldn't be," the Black Dragon King said. "He's just a businessman, nothing more. He wants you to go and beg him so he can take the initiative so that he can better negotiate the conditions. If he came to us, wouldn't he be in a passive position?" Wow, really sinister enough. Absent Sun was dumbfounded. As a relatively straightforward person, he really couldn't understand the Black Dragon King, this old fox's twists and turns. When Absent Sun was dumbfounded, the Black Dragon King continued, "If you don't believe me, just wait and see. He will definitely be very unreasonable and ask me to go see him." Sure enough, just as the Black Dragon King sent the message, he heard Wuji say, "How did your discussion with your boss go? When will he come over? I'm very busy." Boss really has a godlike foresight. Seeing that Wuji's reaction was exactly the same as what the Black Dragon King had said, Absent Sun was full of admiration. Humph! Seeing Absent Sun's message, the Black Dragon King snorted. "Playing this game with me, he's still very inexperienced. Tell him to come see me if he wants to discuss business. I'm also very busy. He will definitely come." Yes, Absent Sun very obediently conveyed the Black Dragon King's words to Wuji. Just as the Black Dragon King expected, after hearing Absent Sun's reply, Wuji's complexion slightly changed. After thinking for a long time, he reluctantly asked Absent Sun, "All right, where is he?" "Dark Moon City. After we finish dealing with Yu Huicheng, I'll bring you there." Seeing Wuji's appearance, Absent Sun's face revealed an imperceptible smile. It was clear that he was saying, in the end, a little fox is a little fox, far inferior to an old fox. In the Chuanjin Guild channel, everyone was in an uproar. F***CK. Old dog Wuji, didn't you say that the Black Dragon King, that old fox, wouldn't be easily fooled? Why is it so easy for him to meet us? Hee. Wuji laughed mischievously. "I've already fought with him. That old fox is still no good." Chapter 1644. Wuji had already made arrangements for the blood-red war flag. There would naturally be no problems with the acquisition of the mining area. Once they handed over the money, they withdrew their troops. The mining area in the blood-red war flag's hands would be occupied by the players of the Dark Alliance in minutes. After doing all this, Absent Sun did not stop to rest. He immediately led Chuanjin and the rest out of the Yu Huicheng bar. Dark Moon City was considered the territory of the Dark faction and was quite far from Yu Huicheng. However, Absent Sun had helped the Dark Alliance pull in a large financial backer. Although the Dark Dragon King had put on airs and invited Chuanjin and the rest to meet him, it was still a business discussion. It was enough to suppress the other party's aura. They could not afford to slight the other party. Otherwise, with Wuji's 3 million gold coins in one go, it would seem petty to let the other party sit on an airship for a few hours. Absent Sun gritted his teeth and bought a few scrolls from the auction house. With a flash of blue light, Chuanjin and the rest arrived at Dark Moon City under Absent Sun's lead. The craftsmanship of the game Rebirth was quite exquisite. The 300 main cities of the continent of the brave could be said to have their own characteristics. There were basically no repetitive scenes. However, this Dark Moon City looked somewhat similar to Yu Huicheng's. The biggest difference was that the sun hung on the horizon of Yu Huicheng's, while the moon hung on the horizon of Dark Moon City. In comparison, as a main city of the Dark faction, Dark Moon City should have been evil, but it had a somewhat poetic feel to it. After all, seeing the moon was either homesickness or nostalgia. As for seeing the sunset, other than a love at dusk, Chuanjin and the rest could not think of anything good. However, they were not here to admire the scenery. Getting down to business was the most important thing. After sighing for a moment, the group of people from the Quan Jun sect followed Absent Sun through many turns and arrived in front of a tavern. Seeing the bar, Wuji could not help but smile. As expected, working with smart people, regardless of whether they were friend or foe, would always make you feel comfortable. There was a huge difference between the game world and reality. Whether it was an ambush or a sneak attack, it was much more convenient than the real world. Therefore, most of the time, except for some unspeakable transactions, everyone would look for a place that had nothing to do with each other. The tavern was the most common place. It had to be said that although the Black Dragon King was not a local player, he was still very sensible. Since Xuanzhen's group had come all the way here, he was not unreasonable enough to ask Xuanzhen's group to go to his guild's encampment to discuss business. Of course, even if the Dark Dragon King really asked Xuanzhen to go to the base of the Dark Alliance, Wuji would not go. He would definitely raise his own opinion. After all, these guys from Xuanzhen didn't come here with good intentions. It was really inconvenient to do things in someone else's territory. Just as Wuji was sighing with emotion, Absent Sun pushed open the tavern's door, pointed inside, and respectfully said, "Boss Wuji, please." Xuanzhen's group nodded, and then walked into the tavern with their heads held high. Inside the tavern, the Black Dragon King had already finished clearing the area. He was now sitting in the center of the tavern, looking like the godfather of a gang. Beside the Black Dragon King were a few fully armed players. The players had serious expressions on their faces, not saying a word. It was not difficult to see that this was a group of experts who were not weak from the glow of the equipment on them. Xuanzhen's group did not stand on ceremony. They walked in front of the Black Dragon King's table, pulled out their seats, and sat down. The Black Dragon King's subordinates were dumbfounded. Although the Black Dragon King was a little displeased, he did not show it. What an arrogant guy. What kind of place is this? Is it a place where anyone can sit? At this moment, Absent Sun hurriedly walked in, pointed at Wuji, and introduced him to the Black Dragon King. "Boss, this is the rich guy mentioned, Wuji." "You are Wuji?" When the Black Dragon King heard this, he looked up and down at Wuji and said, "Why do I feel that you look familiar?" Of course he looked familiar. Previously, the Black Dragon King had been tricked by Wuji, and the two of them had met once. Although it had been a long time, and the Black Dragon King's impression of Wuji had faded, he still had some impression of this face. He said he recognized you, and that you look familiar. Bao-san calmly translated. "It's right that you look familiar," Wuji said with a smile. "I'm really afraid that you won't remember who it was that beat you up. You are." When he heard Wuji's words, the Black Dragon King was shocked, and a trace of surprise appeared in his eyes. "We met at Siamatai," Wuji said calmly. "It's you." Siamatai had been snatched away by Xuanzhen only 2 months ago. When Wuji said this, the Black Dragon King instantly remembered who the person in front of him was. When he looked to the side, as expected, the tall and burly Grandmaster of Combat beside Wuji was still as eye-catching as ever. After all, the Black Dragon King had been through a lot. Although he was shocked, he quickly calmed down and asked expressionlessly, "It's you? Why are you looking for me?" "Huh." Just as the Black Dragon King finished speaking, Lao Wang suddenly stood up, grabbed the bench behind him, and swung it, smashing it heavily on the head of a Dark Alliance player beside him. The player let out a dull grunt and was directly smashed onto the table. When Lao Wang attacked, the originally calm Black Dragon King was scared out of his wits. He could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. The other people at the table also trembled in fear from the sudden stool. Seeing that the people from the Dark Alliance were stunned, Wuji let out a cold laugh and said, "Of course there's something. Master Wang would like to talk to you." As he spoke, Wuji looked at Lao Wang. Bang! Lao Wang casually pulled out his long blade and split the table in half. He then said fiercely, "I'm here for nothing but to teach you Japanese dogs a lesson. The lesson is easy to understand. It's just 8 words, a life for a life, a debt for a debt." With that, Lao Wang waved his long blade and pointed it at the Black Dragon King. "How do you want to die?" The Black Dragon King asked in shock. "We have no grudge against each other." Why do you say that? No grudge against each other? Lao Wang pointed at evildoers run wild and said, You don't know me, but don't you know him? Call the sovereign descends over and see who this is. This, the Black Dragon King looked at him, then looked at Wang Yu, his face filled with confusion. At that moment, one of the players from the Dark Alliance whispered, Boss, this person looks like evildoers run wild. Evildoers run wild. The Black Dragon King was stunned when he heard that. He sized up evildoers run wild in disbelief and said, You are evildoers run wild? That's right. Evildoers run wild nodded and said, I am. I'm sure you know why we're here. F***CK. Chapter 1645. Originally, Absent Sun thought that he would be able to reach the pinnacle of his life after bringing a rich man with him. Who would have thought that he would actually invite a wolf into his house and bring evildoers run wild with him? Damn it, it might even affect his future. However, what made Absent Sun feel strange was that after evildoers run wild's identity was revealed, the Black Dragon King did not panic in the slightest. On the contrary, he was much calmer than before. After all, the unknown was the most terrifying thing. Xuanzhen's group had once tricked the Black Dragon King. As for the purpose of Wuji's visit, the Black Dragon King could not help but feel a little flustered. However, evildoers run wild was looking for the Black Dragon King for only one reason, and that was to go straight to the mining area. Now that he knew the purpose of Xuanzhen's group, the Black Dragon King's panic was swept away. So it's you. The Black Dragon King looked up and down at the young man who looked very similar to Wang Yu. He smiled indifferently and said, Young man, we are all doing business. If you agree to a bet, you must be willing to lose, understand? Violence will not solve any problems. Regardless of whether it was in or out of the game, the Black Dragon King was a three-man team. Therefore, his methods were very commercial. Although it was in the game, in the Black Dragon King's eyes, using force to fight for territory was very low-level and childish. Moreover, now that evildoers run wild had come knocking on his door to blackmail him, it was the lowest of the low. No. Before evildoers run wild could speak, Wang Yu, who had been silent all this time, suddenly waved his hand and said, Although violence cannot solve problems, it can solve the problem of people with problems, such as you. Oh. The Black Dragon King raised an eyebrow and looked at Wang Yu. He said, I know that you are very powerful, but can you kill me? Crash. Following the Black Dragon King's words, the players around him stood up, pulled out their weapons, and stood in front of the Black Dragon King. At the same time, a white light flashed inside the tavern. A group of players in black armor came out and immediately surrounded Xuanzhen's group. Seeing this, Wuji couldn't help but mock. The Black Boss is really a man of appearance. He didn't forget to bring so many bodyguards when he came out to talk business. There's no other way. The Black Dragon King smiled and spread out his hands, saying, You can't help yourself in Jianghu, let alone in your own territory. Something's wrong. Wang Yu denied it again. This is not the territory of the Japanese. Also, it's easy for me to kill you. These small fries can only buy me some time. Fuck. The Black Dragon King didn't understand Chinese and needed a translator, but the players around him all understood Chinese. Hearing Wang Yu's words, the group of people burst into an uproar. Damn it. What did it mean to be arrogant? What was arrogance? Wang Yu's interpretation was incisively and vividly. Since this group of people could follow the Black Dragon King all the way to the local server to snatch territory, it was obvious that none of them were weak. In Japan, the Black Dragon Society was the largest guild. These guys were usually arrogant, but now they were treated like nothing by a Grandmaster of Combat. How could they tolerate this? Without waiting for the Black Dragon King's order, a warrior beside the Black Dragon King picked up a big sword and slashed at Wang Yu without saying a word. You don't know what's good for you. Seeing that the warrior charged straight at Wang Yu, the Xuanzhen people couldn't bear to look at it. There were 13 Xuanzhen players present, including Old Wang. Of all the people he could have hit, he had to pick the most difficult one to deal with. After all, he was a Japanese, and his actions were straightforward. In the face of the Japanese players pouncing on him, Wang Yu didn't care. He didn't dodge or evade. Just as the players slashed at him, he suddenly stretched out his left hand. Smack! Without any deviation, Wang Yu's fingertip poked the wrist of the warrior holding the sword. Wang Yu's technique was very cunning. He poked the warrior's pulse. Although there was no sense of pain and rebirth, there was a conditioned reflex. The Japanese warrior involuntarily loosened his grip, and the long sword in his hand fell to the ground. Wang Yu reacted quickly. He grabbed and stabbed with his right hand. Puffed. The long sword pierced the throat of the Japanese warrior with great precision. -121145. A huge damage number floated up. The Japanese warrior died on the spot, turning into a white light. The scene changed. The unlucky warrior appeared at the resurrection point with a confused look. He looked in the direction of the tavern, his eyes full of confusion. Obviously, he was the one who made the first move. He was also the one who pulled out the knife. This could be classified as a suicide. You're asking for it. Seeing that Wang Yu dared to fight back despite being surrounded, the players from the Dark Alliance were stunned. They immediately surrounded Chuanjin's group. Although the tavern in Dark Moon City wasn't too big, it wasn't small either. Other than Chuanjin's group, there were close to 100 players from the Dark Alliance. The tavern wasn't very crowded. The Dark Dragon King was a person who did things carefully. He realized this when he ambushed his subordinates. Therefore, before Wang Yu and the others entered the tavern, the Dark Dragon King had already moved the tables and chairs in the tavern to a corner. At this time, the players from the Dark Alliance rushed in front of Chuanjin's group without any obstacles. Smack! Looking at the enemies coming from all directions, Wuji calmly snapped his fingers. Clean the floor. All right. Mingdu licked his lips and pulled out a glowing staff. The staff was completely red, as if surrounded by flames. The two wings at the top of the staff were faintly covered in blue lightning. Hellfire impact! After pulling out the staff, Mingdu turned around and pointed behind him. A black flame about 2 meters wide instantly shot out parallel to the ground and flew straight to the back. Hellfire was the ultimate move that Mingdu had just learned from a mission. Although the area it covered was not as large as a large-scale AoE skill like the Cloud Storm, the damage was high. It was definitely the strongest among all of Mingdu's spells. Even a powerful single-target spell like the Thunderstorm spell was inferior to it. With the support of the Vermilion Bird Staff, the damage of the fire element magic was raised to another level. Even if the people behind Chuanjin were close combat professions with heavy armor, they would definitely die if they were hit by Mingdu's attack. Swoosh! A black flame swept past, followed by layers of white light. Mingdu directly cleared an empty space behind Chuanjin's group. Retreat! At the same time, Wuji gave another order. Yinlao Air raised a shield and blocked in front of the people of Chuanjin. Chun Xiang waved his staff, and 10 little ghosts stood in 2 rows on the empty space that Mingdu had cleared, creating a path for the people of Chuanjin. The others retreated a few meters in unison, leaning against the wall of the tavern. At this moment, Chun Xiang smashed his staff on the ground, and the 10 little ghosts sensibly protected the people of Chuanjin. The people of Chuanjin had easily broken through the encirclement of the players of the Dark Alliance that had surrounded them. Chapter 1646. In the online gaming circle, the players of the Huaxia server had always been very powerful. The Dark Dragon King had suffered in this aspect before. Hence, when he came to the Huaxia server to cause trouble, the Dark Dragon King had the foresight to bring along a group of the most powerful experts from the Black Dragon Guild. However, seeing the ferocity of Chuanjin's group, even though the Dark Dragon King was already prepared for it, he was still slightly stunned, revealing a surprised expression. However, the Dark Dragon King was ultimately a sly old fox who was on par with Wuji. Under such circumstances, he was still able to maintain his calm. Seeing that the Chuanjin group had pulled into a formation and leaned against the wall, he immediately ordered his players, block them. That's right, block them. It looked like the Dark Dragon King's judgment was still very sharp, despite his mediocre abilities. It had only been one round of battle, but the Dark Dragon King could tell that the cooperation between his group of subordinates and the experienced experts of Chuanjin was not just a level lower. Actually, thinking about it, most of the players under the Dark Dragon King were single-player games. Although their skills were not weak, this group of people was used to fighting alone and had a strong sense of heroism. Even though the game had been around for so long, their cooperation with each other was only at the level of familiarity. It was enough for them to bully ordinary players, but compared to Chuanjin's group of top-notch experts who were skilled in teamwork, they were still lacking. After giving the order, the Dark Dragon King took 2 steps back, pushing behind the group of players from the Dark Alliance. Without any hesitation, he turned around and ran out of the bar. The Dark Dragon King naturally understood the principle of capturing the ringleader first. He also knew what Chuanjin and his group wanted to do. The most important thing now was to protect himself. Of course, the Dark Dragon King was cunning, and Wuji was not going to give in. Seeing that the players from the Dark Alliance had blocked their vision, he guessed the Dark Dragon King's intentions. He immediately shouted, "The Dark Dragon King is escaping. Quick, chase him back." However, at that moment, the players from the Dark Alliance had already surrounded the Chuanjin group, once again tightly surrounding them. They even launched a wave of attacks. Magic arrows and long swords flew toward the Chuanjin group. "Hide behind me." Seeing this, Lao Air, who was in the front row, let out a loud roar. His body flashed with a red light, and his body immediately expanded by several times. As if he had taken an accelerant, he became a 5-meter-tall, 2-meter-wide giant. The divine god shield in Lao Air's hand also grew to the size of a city gate. The body of a giant. It was a level 60 ultimate skill for shield warriors. Upon activation, the user could instantly transform. Not only would the user's size increase, but their strength, defense, and HP would also double. It was the signature ultimate skill of shield warriors. Even more frightening was the fact that Lao Air's equipment granted him the buff of Giant's body. Even if a normal shield warrior were to gigantify, they would only be able to grow to a height of 3 meters or so. With the buff from his equipment, Lao Air was nearly twice as tall as an ordinary player. If the tavern hadn't been built in a Western-style architectural style, Lao Air's head would have been stuck to the ceiling after transforming into a giant. Crash! After completing his transformation, Lao Air placed the giant shield in front of him and raised it diagonally upward. Immediately after, Lao Air took a step forward. Boom! A loud sound shook the entire tavern. Dang, 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 dang. After a series of chaotic sounds, all the attacks landed on Lao Air's shield. As Mingdu had just cleared out a wave of players, there were only 70 to 80 players left in the Dark Alliance. A wave of attacks landed on Lao Air's gigantified shield, but it didn't hurt at all. Grandson! At the same time, Lao Air stuck out his middle finger and used a group taunt skill. Whoosh! The body of a giant had not only enlarged Lao Air's body, but the attack range of his skills had also increased significantly. Originally, the area of effect of the group taunt skill was less than 2 meters. However, with the support of the body of a giant, with Lao Air at the center, all players within a 6-meter radius were taunted, and they were then involuntarily sucked into Lao Air's body. At that time, Mingdu's second wave of magic had already landed. In an instant, thunder fell from the sky, and fire burned on the ground. Lao Air stood in the middle of Mingdu's magic like a god of war. White light rose around him, and the light shone on Lao Air's face, making his aura even more astonishing. With this wave of cooperation, the Dark Alliance players in the tavern were almost completely wiped out, with only a few long-range professions left. However, before they could recover from the shock of their comrades being wiped out, the air suddenly distorted. Ming Jiandaoxue and Bai Ming Yoyu appeared behind a few of them. The two of them wielded daggers, running and slashing as they ran, as if they were harvesting, taking care of the few weak-skinned players at the back. As for the bandit leader, the Dark Dragon King, he sneaked out of the tavern while Chuanjin was slaughtering his brothers. The Dark Dragon King was the behind-the-scenes boss of the Dark Alliance. The group of people from the Quanzhan sect were not here for the small fries. After clearing out the players of the Dark Alliance, the group followed closely behind and charged out of the bar. However, after rushing out of the tavern, Chuanjin and his group were dumbfounded. At that moment, the outside of the tavern was filled with players from the Dark Alliance. Dark Moon City was the base of the Dark Alliance. The players here, of course, had the advantage. When the Dark Alliance was recruiting, they were the first batch to join the guild. The Dark Dragon King was a cautious person. The reason why he allowed Wang Yu and the rest to come to Dark Moon City to negotiate was because this old thing had made several preparations. The players from the Dark Alliance were on standby at all times. Once they heard that a fight had broken out in the tavern, all the players immediately put down what they were doing and surrounded the tavern heavily. At that moment, the entire street was filled with players from the Dark Alliance. Furthermore, there were many players swarming toward the tavern from all directions. After all, he was the new boss of a new guild. Who would want to show off? Chuanjin was everyone's proof of allegiance. To move unhindered, half of the players from the Dark Alliance on the street were veteran players. However, these players did not have the slightest bit of scruples about their old boss. After all, to the players from the remote areas, Evildoers Run Wild was just a name. They had no feelings for him. The Dark Dragon King stood behind the countless players. Looking at the people from Chuanjin who were surrounded like dogs, he let out a satisfied smile. The older, the wiser. How capable could a bunch of kids be? Feeling pleased, the Dark Dragon King shouted at the people from Chuanjin. Experts from Chuanjin and Sir Evildoers Run Wild. I should have won this time. The current Dark Dragon King did indeed have the confidence to say such words. The Dark Alliance had already taken over. To move unhindered, the Dark Dragon King, as the boss behind the Dark Alliance, had naturally taken over the position of Evildoers Run Wild. He had millions of underlings under him. He could fight whoever he wanted. There were only a dozen people from Chuanjin. What was there to be afraid of? Is that so? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.